This week, Eric Capuano from Recon InfoSec is with us to discuss the evolution of the SIEM. Then Tim MalcomVetter from Cyderes joins us to talk about lessons learned from a career alternating between blue and red teams. Finally, in the enterprise security news, we were off for a week, so there are now 17 fundings to discuss. AI security startups emerge, and 8 acquisitions to discuss. Snyk loses 50% of its valuation. Is building security tools the wrong approach? SEC delays new cybersecurity rules, and why Taylor Swift fans should work in security. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
The cybersecurity landscape is full of single solution providers, making it easy for unexpected cyber threats to sneak through the cracks. That's why Fortra is creating a stronger, simpler strategy for protection, one that increases your security maturity while decreasing the operational burden that comes with it. This is all possible thanks to Fortra's best-in-class portfolio and deep bench of expert problem solvers. Fortra's integrated, scalable solutions help customers face their toughest challenges with confidence. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Fortra, F-O-R-T-R-A. Do the words free time or relaxation sound foreign to you? Perhaps you've been stuck in the office too long, battling cyber threats or worrying about the next strain of ransomware. Let Sophos help provide peace of mind 24/7, 365 with cybersecurity delivered as a service. Because we want you to get back to your weekends, family dinners, and everything in between. And you'll get there with Sophos. Visit securityweekly.com/Sophos to learn more. Are you constantly thinking about how to keep your enterprise as secure as possible? Get to know Chrome Enterprise, the trusted browser for security-conscious professionals like you. Its ease of use for IT and security teams and added access controls protect the remote, extended, and hybrid workforce, keeping your entire enterprise safe. Don't settle for a browser that compromises your organization. Visit securityweekly.com/Chrome Enterprise now to learn more and start protecting your enterprise like never before. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly, and happy National Beans and Franks Day. That was the least worst of 3 very bad options for today. This is episode 323, recorded on Thursday, July 13th, 2023. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is the Czar of Zero Trust, the captain of content, the reformed analyst, Katie Teitler. How are you, Katie?
I am well. How are you, Adrian?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm a little sad. We're supposed to have Guillaume Ross with us, but there are tornado warnings and storms up in Montreal. So hopefully he'll pop in here whenever he can. I'm very excited about his intro. So even though he's probably gonna join after we're done with all the intros, I'm still gonna read his intro because I'm very excited about it.
I think that's more than appropriate.
All right. Quick announcement here. Follow us on LinkedIn for updates across our organization, show highlights, and more. You can find us by searching for Security Weekly Productions. And sorry, I just blew past the National Day because I don't want to talk about beans and franks. I'd rather talk about Eric Capuano and what he's up to. And today's topic is moving away from traditional SIEMs. And I'm being diplomatic with that description. We're excited to have Eric Capuano, co-founder and CTO of Recon InfoSec, with us today. He is also a certified SANS instructor of digital forensics and incident response, and a former cyber warfare operator in the Texas Air National Guard. Welcome, Eric.
Hey, Adrian. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Really excited to bring up this kind of hot topic.
Yeah, so it's funny I'm being so diplomatic because the title I put on this in the actual show notes, if you're looking, that is, and this will be the YouTube title also when it gets uploaded, is "It's Time for the Traditional SIEM to Die," which is a bit more to the point.
Yeah, definitely. And this isn't a new idea, right? I think a lot of folks kind of, will tease this a little bit, on social media and elsewhere. But it's funny because just as many people as you'll see that will kind of raise this question of, is the SIEM really serving the purpose that we intended it to, that we expected that it would? You'll see just as many people coming to its defense, like, hey, people who say the SIEM needs to die obviously have no idea how important a SIEM is and all the purposes that it serves. And so there's definitely valid arguments on both sides of the of this kind of problem. But I think that by just kind of, putting on the hat of, oh, well, SIEM is important, so of course it's useful, it doesn't need to change, ignores the opportunities to innovate and to do things smarter, right? And one of the same things we harp on in security is things can't stay the same, right? If you look at application security and enterprise network security and things like that, none of these things can stay the same, or we'd still be dealing with the critical dumpster fire that we had in like the 90s and early 2000s. So obviously things moving forward is obviously progress, and therefore why should the SIEM be ignored in this equation, right? And so that's kind of the stance that I take on this.
Yeah, and it's something that we cover a lot because we do a lot of market analysis. Both Katie and I used to be industry analysts, so we kind of have that big picture view of the market, and what it's done over the last couple of decades. And certainly something that we see, a trend that we see, is with the benefit of hindsight, some of these categories just aren't very efficient. They're too labor intensive. And there's opportunities to build a better version of that. I think SOAR is another excellent place to look at here. If you look at the Gen 1 SOAR versus the newer ones that have come out more recently, the amount of time and labor it takes to put together the same automation is quite different.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me also preface with, I don't think that the answer exists today to prompt all big mature organizations to just suddenly abandon the SOAR in favor of some new and wildly different approach. But I think that the underlying technologies and ideas now exist, and several proof of concepts. Well, I should say they're more mature than proof of concepts. Things like Chronicle and one of my favorite platforms, Lima Charlie. These technologies that exist today have kind of proven there's a better way of doing this, and the underlying sort of thought process actually is wildly simple when you start to think about it. But you're 100% right. The Gen 1 of anything is going to be the clunkier, more expensive, both in cost, financial cost, but also in labor. And we should constantly be pushing vendors to reduce that cost, but also recognize when maybe the vendors aren't the solution, or maybe the vendors are motivated with competing interests. They're not motivated necessarily to make these things more affordable to you, right? Because that's money out of their pockets. And so at what point do we kind of start thinking outside the box of how can we start to solve these problems ourselves without relying on a predatory vendor marketplace, And so it's just kind of a broad sort of intro to kind of some of my thoughts on this.
Yeah, and I think SIEM, however you want to pronounce that acronym, is the example that a lot of people give when they talk about inefficient security products or very labor-heavy security products. I think in the early days, a lot of people bought one because they, PCI requirement 10 or, something pushed them to centralize and correlate their logs and try to find security incidents in there. And just so many stories of companies that didn't realize, how many FTEs they had to dedicate to a product like this just to keep it up and running, much less the detection engineering and the threat hunting and all that stuff you have to throw on top of there also. So maybe, let's talk a little bit like what is predatory about it? Like the current SIEM model, or what we're calling the traditional SIEM model, which, what I see called next gen SIEM is really just some additional features thrown on top of the traditional SIEM model. So I kind of lump that together with traditional SIEM as well. So eager to hear your thoughts on what's separating, the newer stuff, the examples you mentioned with the older stuff and what's wrong there.
Well, before I start kind of attacking vendors en masse here, let me also own up and take a little bit of responsibility on behalf of the let's say the customer side of this problem, right? For years and years and years, security teams everywhere have gotten into the hoarder mindset, right? The idea of we've got to store and collect every piece of telemetry that we can from our environment because one, you don't know what you don't want to be in a place where the question comes down, hey, it turns out we got breached 6 months ago, but we only just figured it out. We now need to go back in time and figure out, all the little bitty pieces of footprints that were left behind. Nobody wants to be in a place where they can't answer that question because they don't have the telemetry, right? And, it doesn't help when things like the NIST cybersecurity framework and the top 20 and all those things come out and basically say, hey, step 1 is inventory management. Step 2 is you need a SIEM. And so everyone's like, okay, so apparently I need a SIEM and I should just collect everything because I don't even know what it is I might need 6 months from now, a year from now. So part of the problem is on us for inherently becoming data hoarders, right? And we hoard without question. It's just, I don't know what might be useful. I don't know what detections might come out, a year from now that'll rely on data I did or didn't decide to ingest. And so we're hoarders, right? So that is what enabled an industry, a whole, kind of swarm of product builders to say, ooh, so they want to collect and store everything. So let's price it so that they pay for all the, everything they want to collect and store, which, okay, can make sense in some situations, right? Especially if it's a cloud-hosted SIEM. Of course, everything you're shipping up to this cloud-hosted SIEM, well, the vendor's having to pay for ingest and storage and all that. So I can understand that. But like what really kind of grinds my gears is when this is an on-prem SIEM, meaning you bought all this hardware, you're just paying the software license, and you're still getting charged for the consumption of your own resources, right? Where the problem that creates is now you either have, if a company's got deep enough pockets, they might just eat that and say, okay, I guess our Splunk bill is going to be $1 million a year or, whatever. Because because SOC compliance or whatever says we've got to keep, let's say a year's retention or whatever, that's outrageous because it's your storage you're putting all that data on to make that decision to retain as much as you are, but you're going to pay that vendor for all that storage. And it gets even uglier when you get into license models where it's not even just the throughput of the telemetry. But let's say you have some functionality that enriches that telemetry as it comes in, and now you're paying for that enriched data, right? So you're getting like double penalized here, that you're paying on the raw ingest, and then you're paying on what gets enriched, and then EPS, further stored. Yeah, and it just gets outrageous, right? And so now you've got end users having to make this decision of, okay, so maybe collect everything is a bad idea, and now they're carving out entire chunks of telemetry, which could very well be very important telemetry, but we can't afford that license, and so let's not ingest the firewall, let's not ingest this subset of systems because the bill is just getting out of control. And deity help you if you cross that billing threshold, and now the vendor has a built-in lockout functionality that says, oh, we'll keep collecting your data. You just simply can't access it until you pay us, right? That just, stings.
It's a hostage situation.
Exactly, right. And so these are not situations or predicaments security teams need to be worrying about, like what telemetry do we or do we not collect because of license costs? It's like saying, which kid do you want to get Christmas presents for because you can't afford to get Christmas presents for all the kids, right? Like that's not a problem that you want to have. You would like to have the flexibility and the freedom to say, no, let's ingest everything because everything in air quotes, right? Because there's definitely arguments to be made about which telemetry is valuable in a security use case. But let's also now address the fact that how much waste exists in large organizations where you've got many different business units that are taking advantage of data lakes, right? For business analytics and all kinds of other things. And a lot of this telemetry is the same. It's the same telemetry, but now you're duplicating it into different solutions so that different teams can use it. Well, why not, consider a monolithic sort of data lake strategy that you own, by the way, not something that's going into some locked-in vendor ecosystem, that all the business units that need access to this data can kind of get access to it. And there's just so many cheaper ways to do it where you're not kind of shackled to whatever, big vendor, does next year or the year after.
Yeah. But and it creates other problems too. The more you ingest. I remember the first time I set up a SIEM, I had that mindset of, okay, now let's shove everything into this that they support. And we had RSA and Vision, and within a couple of months, I had over 1,700 devices in there, and we were logging somewhere around 100 million events a day in 2004. And all of a sudden, I had a new job because every single day, some of those 1,700 devices would go missing or stop sending us logs for some reason. And I had to go hunt down why those logs were no longer coming in. Somebody redid the Linux systems and wiped the syslog, or some service account got locked out and we couldn't pull from the Windows systems anymore. And it was just every single day I was chasing down why logs were just suddenly not coming in anymore from a source. So as you scale with this, you add those kinds of issues too. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. I mean, the data logistics is its own kind of beast, but you're 100% right. The reliability of getting data to a SIEM is certainly something else to consider, which actually brings up another interesting topic. So I can't tell you how many times I've worked with a security team with an on-prem SIEM, right, which comes with its own host of kind of problems, right? Because when it's on-prem, that means your organization owns kind of the care and the feeding of this thing. And I'm not even talking about things like tuning signatures and making sure that logs are coming in, but what about underlying hardware? What about, scaling the clusters? I mean, there's so much that goes into the total cost of ownership of this. But the new big challenge around on-prem SIEM is, when the pandemic kicked off and, whatever major double-digit percentage of the workforce went remote, what now happens when all your systems are off the old castle moat, network? They're all distributed and people are working from home. How are you reliably getting data into that SIEM that you have sitting in your data center somewhere at your headquarters, right? And so that's a whole nother challenge. But take something completely separate from that, though. Another big gripe, and you've probably encountered this, Adrian, is what about portability of that data? What happens when you're using a SIEM for years? You've got terabytes, however many ridiculous amount of volume of data in the SIEM, and you fall out of love with the vendor that you're using, and you want to switch to something else. Have you ever asked the question, what would it take to get our data out of this solution and into another one? Right? Do you really own that data? I mean, you might own it as of today because you're still paying that license, but if you wanted to transport that data, put it into something else, is that even possible? What kind of lift would that be?
Do they keep the raw data? Because you would have to do the raw data, because the chances that the new SIEM vendor has the same format for normalizing, after they normalize everything is it's not going to happen. You got to have the raw data.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I use an analogy that I think will resonate with a lot of, kind of traditional, IT and security folks that, back in the day when, kind of layer 7 firewalls were getting big and IPS devices, things like that, if you had a really mature approach to this, if you wanted to secure your network, not just at the perimeter, but also in the east, west, and all that stuff, you would put, IPS devices kind of throughout the network, right? In the core and in the various different segments. The problem that comes with that is what happens when I want to replace one of those IPS devices, or I want to replace all of them because, Palo Alto's too expensive and I want to go with FortiGate or whatever. Well, now I've got a network downtime problem because I'm going to have to break the network to pull those inline devices out of the network. And then came this kind of clever idea of, wait a minute, what about instead of just putting those devices in line with the network, meaning if I take that device down or it fails, well, that network segment drops and dies, right? Well, let's put these active taps in place. Just very simple device. All it does is pass traffic, but it can simultaneously kind of route traffic through an inline device. But I can basically shut that valve, take that the big IPS out of the equation without dropping the network. Okay, that afforded flexibility and resilience to network engineers that wanted to be able to rip and replace products and solutions. do you have a strategy like that with your SIEM, right? Because if all you have is this vendor ecosystem of log shippers that go straight to the SIEM and all that stuff, what happens when you want to try a new solution alongside your existing one or swap it all together? You almost want to kind of think about your logistics pipeline to afford you that kind of flexibility using things
like a Fluent D or log aggregation, something like that.
Exactly, right. And this doesn't have to be a big fancy product. I mean, obviously a lot of these kind of capabilities are native to the cloud, which I know can sometimes be a four-letter word for folks when they're thinking about the SIEM. But I got to say that mindset, I think, is also something that needs to die. The idea that the SIEM must be on-prem because we don't trust anyone with our data. Okay, well, I mean, at the end of the day,
it's not there in the first place.
Well, yeah, and I got to say that, folks, really, come to terms with the fact that Microsoft, Amazon, Google, these guys know what they're doing as far as running data centers, right? The foundational uptime and reliability and all that stuff covered, but even down to the security components of it. I mean, of course, you can misconfigure your cloud configuration, but the cloud itself, I mean, you're not hearing about 0 days in GCP, misconfiguration. Sure, but anyway, you've got to break out of the mindset, because not only are all these features and functions kind of native to the cloud, but also the availability. So when all your workers are spread across the globe and remote, you're never worried about, oh, well, that system's off the network, so it wasn't shipping logs. It doesn't matter if it had connectivity to the internet at a Starbucks Wi-Fi access point, it was shipping telemetry, right? It's good to go. But the other thing that we benefit from by thinking about the cloud and how it can enable us is the air quote, infinite scalability and compute power that you have there. So let me give you one quick example of kind of what I mean by that. So right now, the idea is we want to hoard all of our data. Well, your traditional on-prem SIEM treats all data the same. It doesn't distinguish between recent data or more important data than other data. So you're paying a flat price, for every bit, byte, and log you're shipping into that thing. Whereas the reality of it is, the data coming into your SIEM has a very short shelf life of actionable, valuable, right now, do it. Meaning, detect a threat that's happening right now. I'm not saying that the older data is not valuable, but it drops off in value substantially after the first, week or two. So why should you be paying for all of that data to be sitting there hot searchable for a premium? Now, what is the use case of data that's past that shelf life, right? There is a use for it. It's things like, running retroactive detection or retroactive threat hunts and things like that. But do you really need instantly hot searchable data that you're paying a premium for to run the periodic, threat hunt over the last year's worth of telemetry? Or could you be putting that year's worth of backlog data into something super duper cheap like S3 or something like that, and then use the power of the cloud to spin up 1,000 cores and instantly rip through all that data for that periodic hunt that you want to run, right? And it's going to cost a fraction of what it would cost to have that all sitting in a big hot searchable Splunk cluster. Or even if you go the open source route, which my team is intimately familiar with, that's still an expensive cluster when you're dealing with that kind of retention. It's not the most economic or efficient way of getting it done.
Right. It's kind of like the difference between, like if you live somewhere where you need a car maybe 2-3 times a month, do you buy one and have it idling in your driveway? Or on the street next to your apartment, or do you just rent one, or call an Uber 2 or 3 times a month? Yeah.
I love that. I love that analogy, but to really kind of emphasize how big of a problem I think this is, Adrian, using your exact analogy, it's like you got a lot of teams out there with the Ferrari sitting there idling in the garage. It's not even just a car. It's a supercar that's burning premium gas, and you're right. They're taking it out to drive a couple times a week, and so the amount of waste that I see in this area is pretty egregious. And I just think it's we're clinging to old mentalities, right? Yeah. Or we're drinking too much of the vendor Kool-Aid, thinking that hey, if I just buy a SIEM, my problems will be solved. Folks, that's not the case. Whether you're buying the top shelf product or the bottom shelf, like it's not a silver bullet. And so own it. Own some of the care and feeding that it takes to build and maintain a SIEM, because it has multiple benefits, but one of my favorite benefits of kind of taking more hands-on approach here is it breeds expertise. If you're hiring folks and their job is to sit there and just wait for the SIEM to tell them there's a problem, you're never going to build a team of stellar, analysts and threat hunters, right? You're going to build a team of SIEM users, right? But if you put the ownership of that capability in their hands, say, okay, folks, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have an enterprise powerful, kind of SIEM solution, but it's only going to have, the last 2 weeks of data in it. Everything else goes off into Amazon S3, and then we're going to have these Athena playbooks or these Athena sort of queries that we use for doing our threat hunts. You put that in the hands of an analyst team, they're going to have to get a little smarter than just pushing a button in their SIEM, and that's where they're going to start getting better and more effective at their jobs. When they have to actually pull out the wrenches and do a little bit of this themselves, that's the kind of expertise that you want on a security team. Critical thinkers, not button pushers, right? And so that's just kind of another one of the benefits.
Yeah. Yeah. Katie, I wanted to give you a moment to ask some questions if you had some.
Sure. You covered a lot already, but in terms of working with the SIEM, like you said, it's really entrenched in most security teams' brains that they have to have it, right? And at some level, they have to have something similar. But when it comes to prioritization, the SIEM isn't necessarily going to do that for you. What are some of the things that people can do, that companies can do to start weaning themselves off of that hugely heavy reliance and start building that future team, that forward-looking team, that very strategic and critical thinking team?
That's a really good question. And so I'll kind of piece together a couple of things I've sprinkled kind of throughout the conversation, but with more emphasis on kind of a order of operations here for this, speaking directly to your question. So one of the first things I think teams should be thinking about, especially ones that are sitting on big, heavy, expensive solutions, how do we kind of wean off this drug of this push button SIEM that supposedly is going to save us all? Well, first, start to think about how you break free of being locked into that vendor. That's kind of the first and most straightforward approach to kind of gaining a little bit of freedom here. And that comes back to kind of my tap analogy, right? Is if right now your SIEM sort of solution is very much, locked into this one vendor's way of doing this thing, think, hey, can we put something in front of this SIEM that's catching all the logs? Right. And this thing affords us flexibility to maybe split data, twin data, right? And to Adrian's point, tools like Kinesis, right? And things like that would be able to take logs, ingest them, and then split them into more than one solution. Now you've got a little bit of flexibility, and you're less locked into that vendor because now I can put something cheaper alongside it. So that's where I can start to do flexible things like, okay, this big Splunk instance that's costing us too much money, the only way I can reduce the bill is either ship less logs, which I don't want to do, or tune down my retention, right? Not hold it as long as I currently am, which maybe I don't want to do that either. Well, by introducing something in front of that SIEM that can catch the data, twin it to multiple places, now I can have the expensive solution and retain less, but it's still doing the things that it does well. And I can have a very inexpensive solution that's just basically my hoarding spot. Just ship everything to that one. It costs me significantly less, right? And so once you're now in this spot of freedom, it takes a little bit of the pressure off of, well, we can't change this. We need this tool. We don't have anything else, and we don't want to go through the labor of replacing it. That would be an 8-month project and cause all kinds of problems. Now we have options. It's giving yourself these options that even enables you to start thinking about, okay, now what's next? What's next is, let's check out this new cloud capability that would allow us to hoard, 5 years of data at a fraction of the cost of what it would have been on our traditional SIEM. You have that option now because of this kind of forward thinking, hey, let's get something in front of the SIEM that would enable us to start kind of trying out new ideas and new concepts. But a slightly different point, though, to your question as well. What about organizations that aren't even there yet, don't even have the SIEM, but they know this is something that they need? Well, really, the crawl, walk, run there, in my opinion, is don't start with the SIEM, start with log aggregation, right? Which functionally a SIEM is log aggregation with some, detection and alerting and stuff built onto that. But really get your arms around ingesting data, because that's a problem you're always going to need solved, is that long tail ingestion of data, having, 6 months, a year, whatever, your specific business requirements are. So start with log aggregation and then work your way up to SIEM, which is really just an evolved version of that. But if you start with log aggregation, what you might find is you've already solved the biggest piece of the SIEM problem, is aggregating data all in one place, just so that you can do intelligent things with that data, right? Analytics and detections and things like that. And you might just find you can solve those problems by just bolting on cheap or in many cases free solutions onto that existing log aggregation solution that will provide what you need out of a SIEM. And suddenly you've accidentally just saved yourself potentially millions of dollars, right, by doing it this way. But of course, let me also, it wouldn't be fair not to clarify that this requires expertise, right? This requires thinkers, builders, engineers, but this is the kind of folks that you want on a highly effective security team.
Sure, but then you come into the question of consolidation, right? We keep hearing about this need, this desire to consolidate, not just for cost purposes, but for efficiency purposes, because there's so much tooling out there. So now if you're splitting off the SIEM's functionality into various tools, does that create yet another problem? Do we now have people who have to learn this tool and that tool, and it's like counter to the whole consolidation model.
That's an excellent point. And so that's a sword that cuts both ways. But let me clarify kind of at least what I'm meaning to put forward here. I don't necessarily think that the most efficient approach is for like the security team to have their log aggregation or their SIEM, because what about the IT team that also needs access to a lot of that same data, right, for troubleshooting networks and systems and things like that, and then the business analytics folks and whoever else is going to. So I'm still very much for the idea of pooling this data in a way that it is accessible by all the various business units that need it. But a problem I don't think that we're going to get away from is, the IT team is going to interface with that data with their application of choice, right? The security team is going to interface with that data with their application of choice, because these are purpose-built applications, right, that do specific things with that data. And so I don't think there's going to be this single pane of glass. Matter of fact, that's like the biggest lie in security marketing these days, is single pane of glass. But you especially don't achieve a single pane of glass concept when you're pooling data for multiple business units that have very different kind of use cases for that data. But there's really something powerful behind this data, this idea of aggregation of the data itself into kind of one place for the business. Because there was a concept coined by a software engineer named Dave McCrory called data gravity. And it's this idea that the more data you get into one place, there's this nonlinear sort of scale of valuable the value of that data being there as it continues to kind of build mass. And so thinking about the fact that the big cloud providers like Azure and GCP, these guys have already kind of built their big solutions to this problem. Things like Azure's Sentinel and BigQuery and Amazon, or I'm sorry, Azure has their data warehouse. But the more we can kind of consolidate that data, I'm not as worried about having multiple different interfaces to the data, but benefiting from the optimization and the efficiency of putting all that data in one place, not worrying about who has what or doesn't have that, or that we're double paying for the same data to be in multiple different solutions. Because it's the data warehousing, I think, that's a lot of the inefficiencies coming from.
And to that point, because if you do have this massive data warehouse somewhere, how do you start with prioritization? Because there aren't a lot of tools actually that are as good at prioritization as they say they are. But now if you have all of this data and you have different teams looking at it, how do you start? What's prioritization 101? Especially if you're not getting rid of any of that old, less valuable data, at least less valuable right now.
Yeah, I think that's it's kind of a tough problem to solve without more of a kind of a specific sort of use case here. But like, different teams obviously will have their specific priorities for data. The idea is if the data lake itself is as optimized as it can be, the storage of that data is as inexpensive as it can be, as it often is with some of these cloud-centric solutions, you don't really have to nickel and dime as much now about prioritization. For instance, if all of our telemetry is going into Amazon S3, that's a fixed cost on all that data that's incredibly low. And now we're just simply going to choose how we access that data, which that's where the cost often comes into play, is querying terabytes or petabytes of data is not a free thing to do. And each team is going to have to now think about their own specific, approach to, what data we query and how we query it. But you're not necessarily as worried anymore about the cost of storing the data, which is the biggest cost that we currently see today. Because right now, if I was going to put a petabyte of data into Splunk, I better be, Pepsi or the Department of Defense, because that bill is going to be big. But if I can pay pennies on the dollar to store that same amount of data, and I only pay now for how I decide to query that data, I have more control now in optimizing my approach. So of course, that comes with its own kind of, focus on training the users of this data, right? Or having optimized applications that are interfacing with the data. But is that kind of speaking to your question?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, you've got whole teams at bigger organizations who are specialists here, and I know, from my company, when our sales team is talking to prospective vendors, there's always one SIEM guy who's like, "You're going to wrench this from my cold dead hands. Don't even talk to me about reducing how we use the SIEM and what we use it for." How would you counter that?
Well,
there really is. There's always one guy. It's the same thing on the CMB, by the way. I'm not just picking on the SIEM, but
for sure. Well, I'll start with very delicately, because I've worked with all walks of life in this in this space, and I've seen that personality, right? So very delicately and with compassion, because oftentimes there's trauma behind those types of responses, right? But
I want my job. I want my job.
And certifications,
or it just the fear of change, right? The fear of change, and that's why I think cloud is still kind of a four-letter word in some places. It's this fear of, oh no, I'm giving up the control, or I'm giving up the ownership. It's like, but what did you actually have before, right? It's a perception thing, and so don't. Instead of attacking the position, it's instead sort of educating and informing. But let me tell you how much you stand to gain by adopting this new mindset or adopting this new approach. Today, you can only hold on to a month or two of that data because you're starting to hit up against your license limits. What if I told you we would save money and bump that retention up to a year at the same time, and you're not going to have any less use or control of that data? Matter of fact, you can actually get more creative and more thoughtful about how you use the data, because it's not going to be limited by what the vendor feature set is. It's limited by your imagination and your ability to put something together, or to outsource to have someone else, put together a query script or an interface for you. But in my opinion, the functionality only goes up. It's an education step, though, to kind of teach, because a lot of these folks that have clung to these legacy solutions, they think this is the only way, and this is the only way I know how to do it. I don't want to have to learn a new way, and but it's really taking the time to understand the position that they're in, because if we were allowed to let mindsets like that kind of drive the decisions of the business, well, we would never evolve, we would never innovate, we would never optimize. We would miss so many opportunities. And so those personalities are out there, no doubt about it. But I think it should be a conversation, right? Definitely a conversation. And by the way, let me also say, does my idea or my mindset fit all organizations out there? No. But I will say that even some of the most stringent, most strict organizations, like the Department of Defense, have seen this is actually the way. If you go look at this, the Congress approved sort of IT spending budget for some of the biggest agencies in the Department of Defense and similar, they're going all in on the cloud. They're realizing that, hey, like, these guys are better at doing this than we are. Now, of course, that comes with the caveat that it's GovCloud and it's special contracts and requirements and all that stuff. But the point I'm making is the cloud isn't the enemy, but old school cling to the old way of doing things mindset. That in fact I think is the enemy of forward progress.
Yeah. And I think there's also the issue of, well, what's next, right? Because we're in an industry that perceives itself as very, very fast moving, but in reality, there's a lot of old stuff that's still around, old processes, old habits that have entrenched themselves within our organizations, even more forward-thinking ones. And so it's this issue of having this perception of what security is versus what's really going on, I think.
For sure. So kind of a broad idea that I have about that is that a lot of the needs that organizations have today around security are not actually based on today's problems. They're based on the last decade or two of tech debt and things like that. And so I do think that you're going to start to see things get better and more optimized, because a lot of those problems will slowly atrophy and fall off. Now, there will always be new problems. Like, for instance, the argument that if we go from on-prem to cloud, the security problems go away. No, they just change to cloud problems now, right? But there's actually some substantial truth to the fact that, take Exchange, for instance. I mean, that's the best example I can think of is, on-prem Exchange is almost an unsolvable issue today as far as, vulnerabilities, exploits, and attack surface, right? Well, there's huge benefits to moving to in cloud, Azure Exchange. Now, do all of our problems go away? No. So we're still going to have to tackle certain things, but we've eliminated a lot of that old legacy sort of attack surface that some of which may never have a solution for. But I do think, and this is a little controversial, a little bit of hot take, but I do think you're going to see a little bit of a bust of this bubble as more and more of these legacy issues phase out and go away. You're getting a lot more consolidated now with the big cloud providers, not only from an IT perspective, but from a security perspective. Look, they're all trying to consolidate all of this into their ecosystem. And while that's very threatening to a lot of product vendors and practitioners alike, I do think it's the right move. I do think it's the right direction, because if you're a Microsoft shop and all your stuff is in Azure and you're bolted into Azure Sentinel and you're using M365 Defender, I mean, that's as integrated as it's ever going to be. And who better to be solving this problem for you than Microsoft? And I'm not fanboying for Microsoft. To the contrary, only in the last recent years have I really started to kind of take a strong appreciation for Microsoft's progress on security. They're one of the top teams in the world now. They're taking it very seriously. And so, and by the way, this echoes true for all the other big providers. So I think we're going to see a lot of consolidation, which is a good thing, but that's, well, depending on what side of the camp you're on, right? For product vendors and service providers, it's a concern. But for businesses looking to solve the security problem, I think that's going to be one of the biggest advantages is consolidation based on the one or two or three cloud providers of choice. And so I think eventually the huge waves that we see in the space right now will start to calm down, but it's easily going to be another decade or two before you realize it, because of the problem that you brought up, Katie, is that there's still so many legacy problems that are not going away tomorrow.
Yeah, and it seems like we've got a staffing challenge here as well. Like I don't know about your experiences, Eric, but you go in a lot of places and you've got people whose jobs are kind of centered around a vendor product, right? Like they don't know how to do security work, but they do know QRadar's interface, right? And they log into that every day. They click around, they do things. They work tickets basically. The SIEM product creates busy work for them. And when you talk about getting folks who can go off in AWS and build something with Kinesis, or maybe you're going to build something with FluentD and some of the open source stuff out there, I'm not even thinking of hiring somebody with a security background. I'm more thinking of hiring somebody with like a software engineering background, and I'll teach them the security stuff. But like the core of what I want is that ability to build things, right?
That's right. And so that actually comes back to a point that I opened with. And so I want to kind of remind that I don't think that there is a golden path forward right now for big and mature organizations to just like, oh, let's just walk away from our legacy way of doing this. Because you're right, the talent required to kind of wield some of these tools is not likely something you've already got in-house on the security team, but it should maybe kind of trigger a change in hiring processes to say, I no longer want people with just a bunch of Splunk certifications, right? Because I don't want to forever be wed to this product and therefore only have a team of people that only know how to use this product, right? So it's just, over time, starting to kind of change hiring processes, trainings that we make available to our folks. I'm not just going to send you to training for Carbon Black or Cylance. Like I want you to be more agnostic in your knowledge, because we should be able to rip and replace any one of these tools or adopt a new one, and you should be able to effectively wield that tool, right? Because if you're just hiring button pushers, that's all you'll ever have are button pushers. And so, I have a fairly small team at Recon, but I say that the firepower of that team is something I'm incredibly proud of, and it's because every one of my analysts is also a SIEM engineer, a detection engineer, and an ingestion sort of troubleshooter. I mean, they know all layers and pieces of the stack. We built our own interface to our data lake, and because of that, we are experts at every single layer of that stack, right? So, and because of that, the kind of benefit of that is we're an extremely effective security operations team as a result of it. But I won't lie and say that it's easy, right? It takes time and talent and training and a lot of hard work and focus. But the end result of that is phenomenal. The team that I've built at Recon, I'm proud to say, is one of the best and most effective teams I've ever been a part of. But it's because of that approach, that very diligent approach of, we're going to hire critical thinkers and builders that are also analytical and can detect threats and respond. I don't want just one slice of that pie, right? I'd like to, but to your point, Adrian, it's very, very difficult to hire and build these types of teams, and there's the talent shortage, and a lot of contributing factors that kind of make that a pipe dream for many organizations, which is why consolidation is going to start to take the pressure off big enterprises that can't attract that talent. Well, consolidation starts to kind of become the other end of that solution, right? Because if we can consolidate, get everything integrated, now you're benefiting from the cloud providers kind of weigh in on it. Sentinel does a lot of things just kind of magically out of the box, right? So I need a little bit less brilliant talent on my team to wield these tools because of how tightly consolidated they are. But hey, we're not in the picture perfect age yet of all that, but we're on our way, I think.
Awesome. So we need full stack security engineers, more full stack security engineers.
Yeah, just don't take mine.
Yeah. Awesome. Eric, thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today. This has been awesome.
My pleasure, Adrian. Thanks for having me.
All right, stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk blue and red team insights with Tim MalcomVetter from Cyderes. Attackers are only getting more proficient, so how can you proactively adapt your cybersecurity strategy? Core Security by Fortra helps you uncover and prioritize the risks that pose the biggest threat to your organization. Core Impact is a penetration testing tool that safely finds and exploits vulnerabilities using the same techniques as attackers. You can conduct advanced pen tests with ease using certified exploits and automations. Take your engagements even further by pairing with our additional red teaming tools from Cobalt Strike and Outflank. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Fortra Core Security. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Join us at an upcoming official cybersecurity summit in a city near you. This series of one-day, invitation-only executive-level conferences are designed to educate senior cyber professionals on the latest threat landscape. We're pleased to offer our listeners $100 off admission when you use code SECWEEK23 to register. Visit securityweekly.com/cybersecurity summit to learn more and register today. All right, for this interview, we are talking to Tim MalcomVetter, who joins us to talk about lessons learned from his time in both blue team and red team roles. Tim is a veteran security consultant with 22 plus years in the healthcare and retail industries. Most recently, he ran the engineering teams that built the Cyderes CNAP platform. Prior, he built the red team program at the world's largest company, Walmart. Welcome to the show, Tim.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. And I love that we get these conversations back to back. Just talking to Eric Capuano about some similar things. I think he has a similar background. But you know, kind of kicking off here, you know, maybe walk us a bit through your background. You know, I'm not sure how many people jump from blue team to red team and back. I've done it once or twice in my career. But yeah, I mean, maybe talk a bit about your background and like what have been the benefits of being able to move back and forth between those two roles.
Yeah, absolutely. So once upon a time, I was a just a jack of all trades security guy working for a hospital. And back in the day, in that time frame, security, I always tell people like today, we have all these specializations. Security was a specialty, right? There wasn't pen testing or compliance or identity and access management. There wasn't any of those various things. So back then, I was just the general jack of all trades guy. I was writing written policies one day, clearing malware off machines the next day, dealing with deployments, architecture. And I never understood, even way back then, the beginning of my career, pen testing. I never understood the whole hacker thing. If you go deep, dark, looking around on the internet, you're going to find an article from me back when I was in school still writing on why I thought hacker conferences were evil and waste of time. It's really funny because all my thought was like, it should be really obvious, like what the problems are. Like we should just see them and just know, but not everyone does. And so somewhere along the lines, I realized that, you get pen testing and that whole concept is there kind of to stick people's nose in it and to open people's eyes to make them realize what is inevitable, what is possible, or to just confirm it. So I went from being on the defense side for a really long time, talking like 8-10 years, eventually swung over to the AppSec side because I liked AppSec as a proactive thing, to build the methodologies and everything. But you know what? Pen testing was where it was at on the AppSec side. That led from one thing to another. Eventually I was in full-fledged red teaming, went really deep in that world. And now I'm back on the blue side. And for me, that background, that experience absolutely informs what I'm doing today on the blue side. And I wouldn't be nearly as good if I didn't do it. And at the same time, when I was on the red side, I couldn't have been nearly as good if I didn't have the prior blue side. So when we see, and I know, Adrian, you and I share a similar sentiment, when you see these people coming up, they're straight out of school, early in their careers, 1-2 years in, they're like, I want to be a pen tester for the rest of my life. It kind of makes me a little sad because they're going to miss out. They're not going to understand how all this stuff is supposed to be deployed in the first place. And if they don't understand how it's supposed to be deployed in the first place, how can they know how to break it? How can they know what the defender's mindset is? If you're really in a red team, you really need to understand the defender.
Right, like a lot of being on red team is knowing, I bet the chances are pretty low if I turn AV off in the system that anybody notices, right? But if you've never worked on the practitioner side, you don't know what they're going to see, what they're not going to see, or where they're likely to put their plain text passwords in a text file, or, oftentimes when training pen testers, I actually trained a few that really didn't have that blue team background. and they would get access to something and they just get stumped. They'd be like, okay, like I've stolen this account. What do I do with it? Or I've got access to this network or to this database. What now? They don't know how to dig through a database to find sensitive stuff, or to go find some file servers and look for sensitive stuff. They don't understand what the goal should be, or where things might be placed in these environments.
Yeah, 100%. We had some very junior red teamers as well, where they didn't have much experience on the other side, so they'd flip out when they found like an Excel spreadsheet with every single list of IPs and host names and passwords for all these different things. Like, why is this here? Don't they know this is bad? Like, yeah. Also, do you see their ticket queue? There's like 500 tickets. You want to go fix one of their tickets while you're in there? It's you have to have that appreciation for the drudgery sometimes of just IT operations in order to really be good at red team.
Yeah, because in the attitude, there's no empathy, right? It's like, these idiots. If you haven't worked in that environment, you don't. It's hard to have empathy for it. It's hard to understand. Okay, they these people have been in here for 7 years. They've been trying hard. They haven't moved the needle. And yeah, sometimes you give up a little bit. And it's not that they don't know that this configuration is bad or this hardening is bad. They're fighting political battles and stuff like that. They're fighting for budget. They're fighting for all this stuff, and they're only getting some of what they ask for. So, yeah, gotta
100%. I learned that really early on that when you go into debriefs, you should not assume that the defenders don't know what the problems are, because a lot of times the defenders have been sitting there railing on their exec teams for months, years, asking for funding to go fix something. And what we'd find out is like, this thing is like third down on the list, and the funding line was right above it, and they got cut for like the last 4 years. And so, sorry, it's just not important. So we would go in there. What really changed the game for us was taking the mindset that they probably already knew. Even if they didn't, we would just come in and give them the benefit of the doubt. So if they didn't already know, like, oh, cool, yeah, you assume I do. Yeah, I already knew that was a problem. Yeah, and you get an ally instead of an enemy. And if they did know, right, then you're not instantly making them look like a bonehead. You're not just sitting here saying you're a fool. What you're doing is you're coming in and saying, hey, you know what? Let me help you get that funded. I bet you probably knew this. Oh, you did. Oh, cool. Let's go talk to the CISO about this. Right.
I can't tell you how many times I've had that conversation where people are like, yeah, like I was just hoping you could come in and tell management what I've been telling them for the last couple of years, because they won't listen to me, but they'll listen to you because you're a complete stranger and you don't work for this company.
Yeah, for sure. Like that's, I really wish that was the case, right? So now what's fun about all this, Adrian, is I'm on the blue side, and I'm now the recipient of customers' pen test from the red team reports. And I'm seeing some of the findings very similar to the kind of stuff I used to write. And they say things like, just write a sim rule for this. Right. And I have to get to
right.
So
yeah. Just to add some context there, maybe talk a little bit about what your role at Cyderes is, because you say you're on the blue team side, but you're not working for, an enterprise necessarily, right?
Correct. Yeah, Cyderes is the merger of FishTech Group and Herzbeck Group. So Robert Herzbeck of Shark Tank, it's his company, plus Gary Fish's latest company. We've been merged now for a year and a half together. Our primary flagship, we do managed services, professional services, identity, all that stuff. But managed services, managed SOC is our biggest chunk of our business. We've got lots and lots of customers, a lot of Fortune 500 that are really, really large, have very, very unique environments, very complex environments. But we also have a bunch of smaller that are very similar to each other as well. And in the result of that, like, we're effectively their blue team, right? We are their go-to team. They will have policy. Generally, they'll own the policy side of it. Maybe they'll own the incident response. Maybe they're not. Maybe they have retainers with us or others for, like, in case of emergency break glass scenario. But otherwise, we're running their stuff. Like, we're ingesting their logs. We're doing all the stuff you just talked about with Eric, right? Bringing all that in, doing all that work. Writing the detection rules, making sure the alerts are firing, all that good stuff. So I get to play the other side of it, and I get to appreciate all the stuff that I didn't necessarily appreciate as much in the last role for many, many years.
So one of the things I loved about moving to the red team side or moving to a consulting side was, for 7-8 years, I was at a large payment processor. And, I just saw the same politics, the same problems, the same giant flat network that should really be segmented for all those years. And all of a sudden, every 2 weeks, I was getting to see a new environment, new politics, getting to understand how other companies deal with some of these same problems and seeing new problems. And, you're kind of in that same position as well. So I wonder, and you do have this report that we should mention. It's linked in the show notes, the 2023 Cyber Conversations report. I always love this kind of perspective that you get from the position you're in. And it's probably, I haven't read the whole report, but some of that is in here. Where you get kind of an idea of, as an industry, like, what are we missing? What obviously there's going to be some fundamentals missing, but what do you see when you get a new company coming in and you're trying to put things in place? Like, what are some of those fundamentals that just over and over and over again you see everybody tripping up on or missing? Or is it just totally different depending on the company vertical or what maturity stage they're at?
Well, that's a great question. I'm going to probably echo a lot of what Eric was just saying right before in the earlier segment, but I would probably say 80% of things among all companies are the same, right? That Eric was talking about consolidation of vendors. It's the same concept. When you start consolidating tech stacks, you're going to end up consolidating the work, right? The kinds of work, the kinds of things are commodity. So common commodity things should be outsourced, should go to single vendors where they can specialize and go deep on it. I don't think anybody in today's age, like no CISO in their right mind, is going to say, I'm going to go recreate all the detection logic that CrowdStrike or SentinelOne has or Defender for Endpoint, in my SIEM. No one will sanely say that because it'd be extremely expensive. Now, they will go buy a product from one of those vendors or another one that they think is a good value that does those types of detections, right? And what the function of that is, they're outsourcing that, right? They're looking at it and going, it's not worth it. I'm a healthcare company. I'm a retailer. I'm a insert whatever. It's not worth my time as a company to invest to go build that technology or that particular set of controls. So they're centralizing it. So as a result, that's why you're seeing a consolidation of managed service providers coming in and running SOCs for a lot of companies because they just can't afford to staff them. To me, this is really like another rehash. I'm going to play a lot of old school cards here because I'm old and I'm bald and got white hair in my beard now. But when I was, first starting out, my first job, every time we installed a new application, it was at least 1U pizza box server into the rack, right? Like it was a 1U server. We come along and, a year later into the application's life, it's humming at 3% CPU utilization. Disks are mostly empty. Like it's a mission critical application, but it's just sitting there. Then entered in VMware came in out of nowhere and said, hey, we can consolidate all this down, or we could put it all, just need a handful of servers and you can run all your apps. Like, that's really cool. Didn't take long. And AWS said, I can one up this and we can go to this elastic compute concept and we can start doing VMs. And then now we got Kubernetes containers and serverless stuff. And it's the same concept. Well, guess what? SOC is the same way. Yeah. Rather than have a dedicated team in your house, like that's going back to, I'm running 1U pizza boxes in my server rack again, right? Rather than go do that, like, okay, I can consolidate down and I can go and share a SOC. And then it starts to think about how can I really compute or like elastic compute equivalent of that. And that's where we're at now. So we're doing some really cool stuff on the back end to make it where we can ramp up and we can handle when, one customer having a really bad day and there's a spike of 5,000 alerts in an hour. Like, how do we go handle that while these other customers aren't, and that sort of stuff. So it's funny how it changes, but then it really doesn't, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting how there's kind of two sides here. One of the things we were talking about with Eric Capuano was that, specifically with SIEMs, like there's a lot of expense and just, people want to keep all their logs. They want to keep them all forever, but it's incredibly expensive. And some of the SIEM vendors out there are taking advantage of that versus the flexibility and knowledge that you build on staff when you build that yourself. And you build in some log aggregation ability. So, somebody specifically needs like a niche log management or SIM tool or something like that, they can have that. You can just send them just the logs that they need to do that task. And so we got into talking a lot about, really in the industry, something that would benefit us a lot is having more builders, having full stack security engineers, for lack of a better term. I don't know if there's a security specific term for folks like that can build stuff versus somebody who's QRadar certified and just knows how to push buttons in QRadar. And on the other side here, we're talking about outsourcing and increasing efficiency and things like that. Instead of building this in house, managed services being the equivalent of moving to cloud, but with operational, with security operations. So it's like, where do you see those two connect? Like can using managed services actually help you afford some of those full stack engineers, or is it replacing some of that? How do you connect those two?
Well, it's a great question. We think our customers just want outcomes, and they buy an outcome. They want to know that their stuff is monitored, and then how it gets done is really up to them. Like, they want to know that we're going to see their stuff, we're going to detect their stuff, respond to it timely. How we do it is largely irrelevant as long as we're doing it well. On that note, we have over 60 engineers that are just software engineers. Most of them have no security background before. Some of them do. A lot of them are learning security stuff on the fly, but they're building features for applications that our product team is defining. So that's where the security knowledge comes from. We got veterans that understand this, understand the space, understand customers, etc. And like I said, that philosophy that 80% of everything a customer does is commodity, that's what drives a lot of it. That last 20%, though, especially with large enterprise, that is the sticking point. That's the hard part to get the diminishing returns from. And as much as I would love to say the SIEM is dead, believe me, I would love to say that. The last 20% in large enterprises has to be in the SIEM because it's unique. It tends to be things like a line of business application, or they have higher requirements for certain things. So when we're talking SIEM with customers, we're largely asking, like, are you doing this? Do you need it for compliance? Are you trying to just persist logs, kind of like what Eric was talking about earlier? If you need to do those things, then yeah, let's talk SIEM, let's talk storage or whatever. But for anything else, like, what we really care about is what's your detection coverage? What's your attack surface actually look like? Do we have things all lit up the way we need to? Can we do a purple team engagement with you to make sure that everything's working right? Can we just make sure that it's working end to end on a constant basis? That's the stuff that really gets me excited, and that's what where we try to focus.
Yeah, and it seems like there's a big piece there that I get very passionate about, and it's the sure, you've set up things and you've configured them, but do they actually work? Will you actually see that alert? That like, one of the examples I like to use is with Equifax. The emerging threats team produced a snort rule to detect any kind of attack against the struts vulnerability that they were well aware of, and they were taking steps to protect themselves from it. But it's eventually what they got hit by, and they handed that off to the ops team, and they deployed it to the IPS. And neither team actually tested that snort rule to see if it worked or not. Nobody actually ran an exploit to see if it would trigger and if it would successfully detect it. And it seems in a lot of the work that I've done that tends to be some of the glue that's missing, is people actually running through these scenarios, actually double checking. To use another example, I worked with a company. It was scanning all of its websites with a DAST scanner. And for 13 of the 14 websites, they misspelled the domain name. They were scanning by domain name, and there was no M at the end of .com for 13 of those 14 domains. But because one of them was correct, they were getting some results, and they assumed they were all getting scanned when only one of the 14 was getting scanned. So I run into all kinds of issues like that, where they got the people, they got the products, but nobody's actually done any testing. Nobody's actually run through and said, okay, does it work? Right?
Yeah, 100%. So
that's got to be a huge part of what you guys do, right?
Yeah, 100%. This is the kind of stuff that really gets me excited too. So you and I talked about this, that particular story before with Equifax, and the whole notion of somebody you obviously went way deeper in this in terms of research than me, but when it was first came out and everyone was talking about on social media and everything, I was like, this is not what everyone says. There's this simplistic thought that, oh, bad guy found this exploit, threw this exploit at the web server, and like a jackpot out of a like slot machine in Vegas, all this PII fell out. And reality is that thing landed. There was an adversary that then had to do what we used to joke around and call adversary onboarding. It's like, I'm an undocumented admin now. I need to figure out where all the stuff is, how it all works. When we did red team stuff,
adversary onboarding. I'm going to use that.
Yeah.
I'm going to save that.
Yeah, we 100%. That's what we used to call it. We're in the adversarial onboarding phase. So we're onboarded. It's like the previous admin quit. Like, I can't talk to anyone in HR. I'm just off on an island, but I got to go figure something out. And we're on a mission, so we would always just look for the wikis, look for the SharePoints, look for the Confluence, whatever. Go get the documentation. We love finding things like PCI documentation or whatever, because that would give us a map straight to where we wanted to go. It wasn't uncommon for us to take those maps. We would actually draw, like, highlight little rectangles around the things where we're like, this is where the unencrypted credit card data will be based on this flow. We know exactly where that'll be. It'll be in memory right here. We got to get to these boxes and go scrape memory and get that data out. And that would be our guiding line, right? So my point, all that is, adversary had to get in, and then they had to traipse through so much stuff that should have been lit up. It should have been like Kevin McAllister's house at Home Alone. You should have had micro machines all on the floor, broken ornaments, the tar, like all of it. But they didn't have it.
Yeah, the blowtorch. Yeah, it's one of the first things they ran into was it sounded like it was a JDBC file or like a db.properties file, and it had a list of, ideally, least privilege, you would only have the databases that server needed access to in that file. But once you get up to enterprise scale, again, it's one of those things that you do to save time. You have the one database file that has all the databases in it, and you just distribute that to all the machines that need to connect to databases. So each of those machines only needs to talk to one or two, but they've got a list of all 50 databases, and it's got username, password, the whole JDBC connect string, and just store it in a text file. And that's one of the things that early on the attackers, during their adversary onboarding, stumbled upon. And, of course, like the name of the database is probably going to help you understand what kind of data is in there. So they got a pretty quick, fast track to where that PII was stored.
Yeah. Yeah. My team is actually heckling me in the process of what I'm saying, telling me I'm old with my stories. So that's always fun.
Real-time feedback.
Yeah, I love it. Exactly. So, all this stuff matters. Another example, like going back to your story of finding all the, that something is slightly typoed or whatever. It was middle of a red team debrief, went through this entire big thing. We met with the blue team in advance. Everyone's on the same page. And we always would do this. So when we get in the CISO's office, we want to make sure that we're all singing from the same hymnal. Everybody's happy, right? We get in there with the CISO, and one of the blue team guys says, "Wait a minute, I had a detection right there. Like, how did you get past it?" And I was like, "Do you know?" Because we got past it. We got all the way to the final thing at the end. And he's like, no, we've got one. And of course, we hate this when this happens, because then we don't look like we don't know our stuff, whatever. So the CISO says, yeah, we need to go look into that. Well, it took like 6 weeks to get everyone pulled off their current projects, go back in time. This was a multi-month red team campaign. It was super expensive to begin with. They finally go pull it back in, and they found out that there was a routing change that accidentally broke syslog traffic for a fraction of the network. We just happened to be on one of the environments where that change went in wrong. And so we were able to get around this because they really did have a detection. And then right there on that exact moment was my light bulb moment, Adrian, where it was like, okay, the only way this could have been more expensive is if we were a real bad guy and this is a real breach and this is actually now in the news and we're dealing with everything else. So yes, 100%, I'm on the same page there.
We were literally talking about this in the previous segment. I was talking about my first experience with a SIEM, where, and I'll go a little bit deeper into this now because it's relevant, but back in 2004, we had one of the first generation SIEMs, shoved everything I could into it. We had over 1,700 devices in it, 100 million events getting logged every day. And all of a sudden I realized I had this huge SIEM management problem. And one of the things not built into that SIEM wasn't built into the next SIEM I used 10 years later. I hope it's a feature with SIEMs today, but they generally don't tell you when logs stop coming in. Like it might be normal for us to have 30 million firewall events get logged every day. And with that SIEM product, it could drop to 0 and there's no notification that all of a sudden you're not getting events anymore. So that was the next thing I had to do, was build some kind of notification to know, hey, and it would happen every single day. I'd have at least a dozen, if not 100 of those 1,700 devices, for whatever reason, weren't sending me logs anymore. And I'd have to go hunt them down, find the owners, what happened. Like in one case, somebody redid all the Linux servers, blew away the syslog.conf, and we stopped getting logs. One day they were doing battery maintenance in the data center, and they didn't turn our SIEM back on, and nobody noticed for 2 weeks until we had an investigation. So, 2 weeks of logs are just gone forever, because I was monitoring for, logs stopping coming in, but I wasn't monitoring for the actual SIEM to be up, which was a SIEM that we managed in our data center. So it was just a complete mess there. And we ran into those same things where, in the middle of an investigation, where'd the logs go? Why don't we have logs?
I would love to tell you that that's a solved problem, but it's not. We spent a lot of time engineering wise working around that, trying to get that to work. It varies by SIEM. We have uptime, automated checks on things. I won't name vendors. I'll give them some grace on this, but there was one vendor whose entire backend was down for us, but one service was up, and the service we checked against was basically saying, "Can I make a connection?" Yeah. And so it looked up to us, but it was functionally down. Like the UI was down. So, but we didn't know until the customer tried to get into the UI. I was like, "What's going on?" We're like, "It looks up to us," and then we found out we were losing data like that. That was a really bad one. There's other examples where some vendors are better than others in terms of yes, I not only do I see that you've got all of your Palo Alto firewalls, but number 39 out of 100 is actually done, stop sending to us. That's amazing if you can get to that level. Not all SIEMs can do that. But it's also noisy. So when you introduce into a really large distributed type of organization, Palo Alto 39 might go down for a legit reason, and it might take you a half day to a day to figure out if that's intentional or not. Because it could be a multi-national org, and this network over here was intentionally taking that offline because it doesn't need it for the business anymore. But there's separate change management orgs, and maybe didn't get replicated back out, and then you're just trying to track that down. So it is not a solved problem. This is still in the realm of asset inventory management for me. They're going to be problems forever. I mean, I'll be retired, and people will still be trying to solve that.
Yeah. So is the answer just better? Create better tests.
I personally really like creating better tests. I would really like to get to the point where it's automated, where you're testing for the controls like this. Full disclosure, I sit on the advisory board for Scythe, Bryson Board's company. I think they've got a great future in this space. They're obviously they came very much from the red team world, and they're more and more purple every single day. And I think this is a huge opportunity. There's a number of players obviously in this space trying to kind of do it. No one has really solved the idea of making this as boring and simple as vuln scanning yet, right? But when it gets to the point where it's just this thing you do is no longer Hollywood cool, right? I think that's part of the problem with red teaming is because it's Hollywood cool, we spend a lot of time going in deep and bragging about it when it's done instead of going, hey, could I have found that information faster? One of the weird observations I've made the older I get is at the end of the day, most of what we do is just information searches. It's just funnels and filters. And to me, pen testing, red team, this is just another funnel and filter for different sets of vulnerabilities, right? SIEM is just another funnel and filter. EDR is taking that same concept but pushing to the endpoints, right? So it doesn't even have to go to the SIEM necessarily. Cloud posture management tools, same deal. Don't want to pull all of CloudTrail down. I want to just find the bad as quickly as possible. It's people that can filter closest to the data source that really end up winning. And so when you start thinking about this from a detection controls validation perspective, the products and services that eventually figure out how to make this just boring turnkey. Hey, bro, TCP number 12345 was detected every single day for the last 90 days in a row. And something broke yesterday. We ran the test and it's still not working. So what did you change? I turned this one thing off in my EDR console or whatever, right? Or I pushed a policy update that blocked something, right? That's the kind of stuff. When it gets to the point where we can be that proactive as an industry, that's when we'll finally start to win. But we're a long way from there still.
You know what does really well with funnels and filters and that kind of stuff that you were describing? Large language models.
Oh man, you're killing me.
He had
So
to
wait,
go
that
there.
segue.
He had
Let's
to.
hook ChatGPT up to the alert flow in the SOC and just I can get rid of the people, right?
Yeah, just that easy. That easy.
Just for fun, because while we're at it, like why not? We hooked ChatGPT up just with non-production data, but sanitized alerts, threw it through just to see what it would do. It wrote amazing, glorious text copy trying to explain how a certain bad thing was actually an okay, good thing. It 180 degrees was wrong. I had to explain that to our board this morning, who's all excited about generative AI, and everybody's all buzzed about it. Like, how are we going to get this in, or how are we going to use Gen AI? I'm like, you know what? It's great. But it's not necessarily for this problem set. You go look at Microsoft Security Copilot. It looks amazing. When you go watch the video that Microsoft put out, the lawyers put the nice fine print on the bottom that says, do not rely on this for security decisions. Chronicles, one of our big partners, they've got some cool AI stuff coming in. If you notice, it's not making security decisions. It's inferring natural language processing to help them generate rules or help them generate searches. So if I'm a human, I don't have to know the schema and the field names for stuff in Chronicles UDM format. I can just go and ask a question, like literally like I'm Google searching today and say, like, what year was blah, 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 blah person born? And if it's an important person, it returns an actual, like, answer as opposed to links to pages that might have the answer, right? It's doing the same kind of thing, and it's super, super cool and useful, but it's not replacing the person. So when I sat here and I was thinking about, like, okay, why did ChatGPT get this so fundamentally wrong? It dawned on me. If I take 100 people off the street, Adrian, and I ask them, run DLL 32, this weird DLL, comma, this entry point name, is this good or bad? 100 of them are going to get it wrong. Right? 100 of them are going to get it wrong.
And
so if
and
you know what I mean,
when they trained it on data, they didn't tell it, when it's on Stack Overflow, like only train on the items with the green check marks, right? Like it trained on all of it, the green check mark items and the 24 wrong answers, right?
It's I don't know. I think it's gonna be really interesting to see how this Gen AI fad, it's a legit, there's legit use cases for it. I think chatbots for asking questions about how stuff works, and eventually you get frustrated, you type agent, I want to go talk to my T-Mobile agent or whatever. Perfect place for that. But not making security decisions. It's not there yet. We're a long way from there.
Yeah, and it's you can make LLM AI look as amazing or as dumb as you want by cherry picking your use case. But yeah, you really do have to understand how it works, what kind of data it was trained on, what those kind of built-in biases that are going to be there because it all came from human generated content. And I'm sure there'll be new problems that we haven't discovered yet, because in the future, some percentage of what it's going to train on is probably going to be AI generated content. Like how is that going to shift biases and improve or make that training data worse. So yeah, but have you seen any use cases?
Use cases for what?
Have you seen any use cases where it is useful today for somebody in a SOC or a security analyst type role?
Yeah, there's definitely some cool use cases. I'm totally blanking out. A friend of mine's I got a really cool company that does some cool stuff where you can just highlight text and it does a bunch of crazy lookups and stuff. It is I think there's places for it as an augment tool. Like it's where, like in our view, if an analyst has to pivot off glass, the tech failed, right? We want to present as much data as possible to an analyst so they can make a human decision as fast as possible. If they have to go back to a SIEM or an EDR console or a cloud tool or whatever and go pull additional context data, we feel like we screwed up. We didn't pre-collect that data. When we find that out, I always want to tease out from them, what did you do and why? And can I go get that same data? When we're in that same space, we tend to ask the question, well, shoot, if are we going to do this the same way every single time? So if X alert and Y variable is true and Z variable equals this value, are we always saying that this is something we want to escalate to a customer? Yes or no? And if so, let's start augmenting that as like, this is an actual discrete logic rule. We use a ton of discrete logic. I've spent almost all of my career hating cybersecurity marketing, just hating it. And so the fun part about this now is being CTO for Cyderes. I get to I'm a cat going to a bath when ML and AI gets drug out. I'm like, do not use these terms. We have ML adjacent type stuff we do, but we're not going to be one of those companies that just goes and says, yeah, we got ML, we got AI, we got Gen AI, whatever. We got it because we put this widget someplace and relied on it. We use old school stuff that still works. Statistical analysis still freaking works. It's got a lot of value. It goes a long way. Discrete logic, like if this, then that, is super valuable. The majority of decisions that a human makes in the SOC or this work this way. By the way, since we're doing the whole red versus blue thing, I had the same aha moment on the red team side when we started getting pressure, when blue team started getting faster and faster at containment. We started thinking, oh man, do we even have a future here? By the way, this is also another little sub-tangent. All pen testers and red teamers deep down fear the same thing that blue teamers fear, and that is that someday there's not going to be a job for them. They just fear it in a different way. So a red teamer fears, oh man, someday I'm not going to be able to hack into anything anymore. And then therefore I'm not going to have something with findings, and therefore I'm not going to have a job because no one's going to buy our services, and we're not going to be hired to be a pen tester or whatever because I can't find the bad thing. Good, the defender, might think the opposite, oh, it's going to be impossible to protect all the things, right? What we know fundamentally is security is never going to be a solved problem, despite 25 years ago, me thinking if you just got the recipe right, you solve security. It turns out that's fundamentally way wrong. I was so ignorant for thinking that once upon a time. So if I keep that in mind, that you never solve security, right? That means there's always going to be opportunities to do things better. There's always going to be, the red teamers always have a way in. And so when we were in this scenario where red teamers were getting beat by faster blue teams, we thought, well, why is that? Well, we need to speed the red team up. Well, how do we speed the red team up? Start asking my red team guys, and some of these are very seasoned pros, and say, okay, when you get a shell, what do you do? And they go, I just feel it, man. Just no kidding. I just feel it, man. I'm just going to get in here. I'm going to see. I'm just going to see. You're like, well, what does see mean? And what we found out is they're doing the same handfuls of things every single time. So it's like, cool, that's context data. I'll just write our own private C2 to go pull this context data first for you and present it to you, so you don't have to go collect it and waste an hour, right? You now can shorten that cycle. Then we started getting better and better at it. And okay, well, what else are you gonna do? Well, if I land on this box, maybe I'm in this environment with these conditions, I'm gonna pull every PDF and Excel file I can find. Cool, I can automate that. I'll just go crawl the entire thing and pull it all before you get there. Shell calls back at 3 a.m, you're asleep, it's already done. Right? We did all that on the red team side. Bad guys are doing that as well. We know that bad guys do that, real ones. So it's like, okay, on the blue team side, why don't we do the same thing? An analyst, when they get in there, they get this alert, what do? Do they just feel it? No, they're going to get context. So why make them waste 15 minutes, 20 minutes to get context? Sometimes it takes them 15 minutes just to get logged into the right systems. You know what I mean? So I'm rambling a little bit, but
yeah.
The point is,
no, I got you. Some of the simplest automation, can just be I've watched product demos where they'll add just one thing, and it means you don't have to open 18 tabs anymore. And it's just like the most miraculous thing you've ever seen, because somebody has to actually understand that workflow to understand, where you can make improvements and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. End of the day, cybersecurity is not going to be ever be a solved problem. It's always going to be there. Detection is always going to be super important. If you don't have a detection program, it's always going to be there. You don't really have a detection program if you're not constantly, testing it to make sure that it's working correctly. So that's where the whole blue team, purple team, controls validation is going to be there. There's going to be somebody that solves that. I want to be in the thick of it when it gets solved, right? Or at least when it gets made easy. And then that's when we're finally going to get even better than where we are today. And that's the maturity that Cyderes is chasing. That's why I personally am chasing. That's why I encourage anyone that's in the space, figure out how to not just collect the logs and do the good detections, but measure detections and make sure they're always working. Right.
Yeah. Make sure they're working. Make sure they're working.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that grabbed me in this report, we've got a few more minutes to chat here, but just wanted to call this out that Google Cloud experts predict that 90% of security operations workflows will be automated and managed as code by 2025. And so the wording is really interesting here. Automated and managed as code, like that doesn't mean AI doing the job for you, right? That just means that you've kind of moved to managing these automations instead of manually clicking on things. You're harnessing APIs. We talked about needing more engineers, more people building things in security. But yeah, that's do you think that's, well, first of all, that's not you guys that said that. Do you think that's accurate? You think we can get there in just a couple of years?
That came from Google ASO, the Autonomic Security Operations Group. That's a partner of ours. We stole one of their people. He now runs our SOC. That's Steve Meckel. We 100% believe in that. That is exactly the way we're going, the way we operate. We at Cyderes are currently operating in the 80s in terms of percentages of automated decision making that happen right now. I look at it every day. We have a good day, we'll be like 87, 88%. A bad day will maybe drop to 78, but that's where we are today. I just told our board this morning we're shooting for 90% by the end of the year to try to get there on a continual average basis. That doesn't mean that you don't have humans guiding the process. Right. We had a big company meeting earlier this year. I pitched this whole thing. It's honestly no different than looking at how cars are made. If I were to ask you, Adrian, on the spot, what was the first car ever made? What would you say?
A Mercedes.
The Mercedes-Benz, yes. But you know what most people say?
What? Ford? Because he invented the assembly line? Yeah.
They would say the Ford Model T. It's the assembly line, right?
I'm just one of those nerds that knows these things.
Yeah. Well, every once in a while, in the cyber, we have a bunch of nerds. So every once in a while, you'll get somebody that knows that. But most people will shout out Ford Model T. And the reason why they know that is Henry Ford wasn't even the first one even remotely close to the first car. The original Benz doesn't even look like a car. It looks like a coach, like a buggy.
But it's a buggy with stuff bolted onto it, right? It's a horse-drawn buggy.
It has a motor. It has the ability to control and maybe a brake, but it's not. And it has a seat, so it's like car-like. Yes, but in 25, 30 years later is how long it took for Henry Ford to get really good at it. When he did, he made the assembly line. And what he just said is, hey, I can bring all the data here. My argument is that's where SOC has been. The original SOC, when you try to do your own, it goes back to the data center concept and sticking 1U servers in. You're doing it yourself. You are handcrafting an entire security program, start to finish, in place, like the original Mercedes. One guy or a small team of people working on that together. The Henry Ford assembly line is okay, now we're bringing things together. Okay, you're really good at just ingestion. So I'm going to put you over here in front of the SIEM. You're just going to work on that. You're really good at responding to incidents. You're a specialist. You're going to go over there. We started introducing the concept of specialization. Well, all of it's still manual. It's just manual in phases. That's where cyber has been for the last 15 years. And if you start looking at in the last 5 or 10, when SOAR started to pick up, we started to see this transition where it's getting closer to the new F-150. So the same company, Henry Ford's company, 100 years later, now an F-150 rolls off the line, 100% automated manufacturing. Not partially. It was partially automated in the 70s and 80s with some of the original, the ugly, when Ford Mustangs got really ugly for a little bit. In that time frame, that's when they started to partially automate spot welds. And that was cool. It was an improvement. It was higher quality for aspects of it, but now they're all the way off the line. Now, that doesn't mean there's no humans, right? So this fear of, I'm taking the humans out of the process and I'm not going to have a human being that's assessing it. It's going to go off the rails or enter Skynet or whatever your fear is, bad decision-making, whatever. That couldn't be farther from the truth. What we're actually doing is freeing humans up to do the things that they're best at. And what they're best at is higher order thinking and higher order tasks. In the Ford F-150 model, what we're talking about is the engineers spend all their time thinking about not just the design of the car or the vehicle itself, but how the pieces will put it all together in the line. So literally thinking about that. And then you got QA people, which is Adrian.
I was going to bring up quality assurance. That has to be there. The more you automate, the more you need that. Yeah.
So you got the QA guy that's going and making sure the margins on the seams are exactly the way it needs to be, and everything's
Handle
lined
gaps.
up, and the machines are in spec, and they haven't gotten out of like. So you still have that. That's still there. They're just not making the cars. They're maintaining the things that are making the cars. And then you've got, like the design layout of in the industrial engineering aspect of how everything flows through. So there's still important aspects for humans to do, but they're higher order tasks. They're not like Eric said, I don't want button pushers. I want full stack people. Like it's the same kind of concept, except for what I'm saying is I want experts in specific things to go in and do their expertise, right? So that's where we're going.
Yeah.
That's our direction. So Google ASO said 90% by 2025. I'll tell you right now, Cyderes will be there long before that.
Yeah, I mean, totally makes sense for you guys. That's where your profit margins are, right? So
it's that, and it's also just scalability.
Right.
The number of times a customer will have so we've got this dashboard, this report that comes out all the time for me. I get it in my email like every day. And one of the things I look at in that dashboard is when we have customers have spikes, like they had a really bad day and something happened. And that dashboard that comes in my inbox, the bar charts are two colors. The one color is how many cases were responded to manually. And the other color is how many cases were automatically handled through all of our tech and automation and our rules and all the rest. When I started seeing these spikes happen and they became the automated color, I was like so happy, right? Because that meant that the SOC didn't have a bad day that day, right? The only way that anybody can grow and handle this is like we need to know. And this goes back to the same thing of centralization. When we realize that responding to these things, 80+% of all security operations are the same, regardless of the company, regardless of if it's nonprofit, profit, healthcare, retail.
So much efficiency to have there. Yeah.
Exactly. So when we get a chance to see a bad thing happen, we go, wow, that was a really bad day. This manual thing happened. We RCA it, or, root cause analysis it, and then we go write automation rules on it that we then apply globally, so that when those conditions occur again in another customer, because someone else is going to have that same control. They're going to have that lacework thing that fires off 3,000 alerts that you spun a new workload up and it has a public IP. Oh my goodness, you're on the internet doing business, but it's still it's a flood. Like you have to go, what is this real? Do I care? Right. So yeah, we do all that stuff, and then we get the benefit of it downstream. Everyone gets the benefit of it downstream.
Awesome. Excellent stuff, Tim. This is really good. Just the combo of these two conversations today. I'm really pleased with everything we got to talk about. Thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today.
Yeah, Adrian, thank you. And Eric, good job setting me up for today. So that was good.
Yep, great stuff. We'll be back in a few moments with the weekly Enterprise News.
The Security Weekly News is live on Tuesdays and Fridays at 12 o'clock Eastern Time most every week. I try to scan and produce a quick look at some major stories to help you keep up with what's going on in and around the industry in a short format. Myself, Jason Wood, and other guest commentators provide greater insight every week. I'm Doug White, and I hope that you will look for the Security Weekly News in all of your favorite podcast catchers and subscribe for the latest content.
Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Follow us on Twitter for live stream reminders, highlighted clips, memes, and more. You can find us at Sec Weekly. One word, Sec Weekly. All right, now for the Enterprise Security Weekly news. You can check out securityweekly.com/ESW323, and you will find all our show notes and all the news details that we're going to be discussing today. There are 40 of them, but that is largely because there's a ton of fundings. We had a week off, so we missed a week's worth of fundings. And there's 17 fundings and I think 8 acquisitions. So you take those out and it looks more like a normal news week. We also have Mr. Tyler Shields with us. Hello, Tyler.
Howdy, ladies and gentlemen. How's everybody doing today?
Doing pretty good. I enjoyed the first 2 conversations we had. Very kind of the theme for this quarter is practitioner focused. So it's been a lot of fun, a lot of very nostalgic for me.
Yeah, taking you back to your roots, to where you came from.
Yep. I don't know if I could go back. Every time I consider a job change, I consider going back, and I don't. I haven't. It's better of it. It's a rough job. Somebody's got to do it, but it's I don't know if I could go back. All right. So lots of interesting stuff to talk about, because it's not just 17 fundings and 8 acquisitions. Like, if you look closer at some of these acquisitions, I think we're starting to see some of the stuff that we've been predicting. I think we're starting to see some companies that realize they're not going to raise another round, and have to look for an exit. And it's interesting. Like one of these jumbo was like a B2C, like personal privacy product. Like it would like help you protect your. I think it included identity protection, that kind of thing. But you connect it to your different Googles and Apples and all that, and it tells you when you have things misconfigured, and it gives you advice and things like that. But then they pivoted to B2B, and killed the consumer product and just started looking for a buyer. And Coalition picked them up, which is insurance. What is the acronym? MGE, something like that?
Not sure what that acronym is.
Yeah, it's basically like a cyber insurance technology company, in other words. I'd have to pull up another window here to check that out.
Yeah,
but,
it's interesting. I was looking through the fundings before the show, and I was looking through the acquisitions before the show, and I certainly have macro discussion points that I think we can dive into for some of this stuff. But funding, right? When you look at, and I didn't Google every single company, so I'm not sure of the primary position and primary bucket that each company fits into, but I am starting to see some consistent themes of certain things that are apparently being funded, right? We could start to talk about cyber insurance seems to be getting some stuff, or seems to be getting some cash. Identity-based companies, identity-based security, using the identity as the perimeter, seems to be catching some cash. Anything that's security of or around or in AI security is obviously catching some cash. No code, low code is consistently catching cash from the app security side. So when we start to think about the things that are catching cash and, think about the forward developments of that, it starts to show some trends. The other thing I want to throw out there is the what isn't catching cash discussion point, right? We're not seeing a lot of the traditional SOC analyst, endpoint, all of these things that are very mature. There's not a whole lot of innovation coming in those spaces, which is really neat to me to see, because usually you see the cycles, right? Where it'll push a certain market by innovating, like the funding will push a certain market by reinventing a market or innovating, and then there's a cycle where it doesn't do that and it's brand new ideas, and then it cycles back to innovation, disruption, then brand new ideas. And so I think just looking at the funding at a high level starts to knock out some of those trends as well.
Yeah, and one of the things we're seeing for the first time is a bunch of startups focused around protecting AI. Here. Yeah, there's at least 4 of them. I might not have tagged them all, but they have a slightly different funding and then AI in parentheses there.
Yeah, and they all have different angles, right? Like some of them are data centric, some of them are infrastructure AI, infrastructure centric. I even received a pitch from one that hasn't quite been funded yet recently that was more about being a proxy, an inline proxy approach to security of AI, right? More like an API sec or a WAF sec for AI. Lots of different ways you can do it, but I don't think anybody has clearly determined how to do that properly yet. Obviously, Daniel Miesler's research is getting the closest to describing how that can occur, but I don't think anybody's figured out the right way to properly secure AI. And I guarantee you, CISOs are not looking at this going, "Hey, we should be buying 6 tools: one for AI security infrastructure, one for proxy."
Like everything else, it's going to need.
I promise you.
Yeah, there's going to be no feature parity, and there's going to be consolidation, just like everything else, right?
Yeah, but there's a lot of money flowing into that AI space, right? A lot of these, almost all of these, are 10 to 30 million if they have an AI knock next to them, right? They're not raising little bits of money either.
Yeah, 5 of them. 5 of these 17 are AI-specific security startups that are just coming out of stealth. Yeah, 23 million for one of them. Go ahead, Katie.
It seems to me that there's a lot of shiny object chasing here, and especially coming off.
Always.
Don't give me that look, Tyler. Don't give me that look.
Oh no, that's a look of total agreement, Katie. That's a look of VCs are herd mentality lemmings.
But coming off the last 2 conversations, we know that SIEM as it exists today, and similar technologies, the older school, if you want to call them that, the legacy technologies, do need innovation. They do need advancement. They do need some freshness infused into those markets to make them usable in today's environments, because they're not. Even starting with that first section with Eric, just talking about they basically can't keep up unless they're charging people $1 million per year, right? And yet the VCs are going after AI and some of these other quote unquote more interesting spaces. And sure, that's great. We definitely want to be pushing the needle as far as innovation goes, but we also want to be not forgetting that there are other areas that are ripe for innovation as well.
Yep, no doubt, for sure. Totally agree with those comments, Katie. Absolutely.
Yeah, good eye on that one funding that was not recent. I don't know what happened there.
Those sneak through. We wiped it off the list. No harm, no foul. We're not even going to say the name. So by the time they refresh it, they won't even know it's gone.
The company that shall not be named is no
16.
longer.
Did I say 7? I meant 16 fundings.
Let's talk about acquisitions, though. That's the more interesting stuff.
Yeah. Yes, certainly. And it's funny, like in a lot of these, I know one of either the acquiree or the acquirer, but I don't know both. Like I've heard of Risk Lens. I'm not familiar with Safe Security. I've heard of CyberGRX. I'm not familiar with Process Unity. Yeah. And a lot of them, like I haven't dug too deep into them because there's so many, but a lot of them use language suggesting maybe it was a merger. You know, maybe we're seeing cases here where 2 companies couldn't survive on their own, and it wasn't but they also couldn't afford an acquisition. Because one of these, which one of these is it? It's Safe Security and Risk Lens. They're both Series B, right?
Yeah, they're both pretty healthy, big companies. Yeah.
Right, and I think this is the one where Safe Security, I think they raised like a 50 million Series B, and there's no in April, and there's no way they're using 100% of that to bring on Risk Lens. Is that the one? Is that the right one? But yeah, and that one looks mostly like they really wanted so RiskLens had the Founders for Fair, which is a pretty popular quantitative risk framework. So both Saket Modi, he's the safe security guy. Who's it was Nick Santa and Jack Jones are the two folks at RiskLens that are also basically responsible for running and creating FAIR.
Yeah, I worked with Jack quite a bit when I was at Misty, which then ran InfoSec World, and he was fantastic. Really great to work with, smart guy. This is kind of surprising to me because this must have been a great offer because they seem to be doing really well on their own. So...
Yeah, and there's no PE company in here. There's no mention of other funding or anything like that. Both are Series B. Like, I suppose if, I don't know what the valuations are here, but, I suppose Safe Security could afford them if they spent most, if not all, of their Series B on them, or maybe didn't need their Series B for anything else. But I think RiskLens had raised over $20 million. So... even if they spent their whole Series B, like, that's not a great multiple, right?
No, it's not. And I was just looking up how much. So Safe Security has 99 million total invested.
Yeah,
including a 50 million in April of this year. Yeah, and a 33 in July of 2021. It's interesting. A lot of these. And I'm not saying this is the case here. I have no idea their run rate. I have no idea of their market penetration, any of that. But oftentimes now what we're seeing is these large late rounds that were so overvalued are now being compressed so far, and companies aren't growing as fast anymore when they're bumping up against running out of capital to operate, either Safe or RiskLens. I'm not saying either one did, but this could be the case. They can't get funded. They can't get funded because of the structure of the cap table, of the ownership table, prior to after they took that last major round, and then depressed from 800, 900, a billion, whatever, down to 300 million. It just doesn't work anymore. And so you might also be seeing, like, I don't want to call it fire sale acquisitions, but certainly, like, hey, we can't really raise right now, even though we're doing great as a company. Maybe we stalled because of the macroeconomic conditions, and it just makes sense to liquidate the company into some other entity. And I don't know that's what's happening here, but I do think you're going to see a continued increased pace of acquisitions in the second half of the year and into Q1, Q2 as more companies bump up against the end of their funding runways.
Yeah, I mean, part of me wonders if this was an acqui-hire, specifically the Safe Security RiskLens one, but it'll take a couple months before we see any evidence of layoffs, before we can look at LinkedIn and see the employees trending. Well, and of course, if they rebrand, if they don't keep the name, it can be really difficult to tell, what the details of that, both private companies. So
yeah,
just
I'm looking at the numbers, Adrian. And RiskLens took 20 million in April 8th of 2019. They were up against the end of their funding cycle. I mean, almost guaranteed that they didn't have much more runway left, and it probably just made sense to sell the business into something bigger, something fresher.
Yeah. And there's a pretty big one here. TPG picking up ForcePoint. So that's TPG is a PE shop, global alternative asset management firm. Okay.
PE firm.
Get fancy about it. Yeah. So I haven't heard a whole lot about ForcePoint. ForcePoint was the combination of Raytheon cyber stuff and WebSense, rebranded. God, it feels like forever ago. Maybe it was 2013, 2014. I forget when that happened.
Golly, your memory is amazing. I didn't remember any of that till you said it.
Well, you saw my physical pain in trying to recall the information. Like, I was plumbing deep.
If you go to ForcePoint's product site on their webpage, you can go to the product drop down. They do every TLDR.
SASE. Yeah.
CASB, ZTNA, SWGR, BI, ZTCDR, 1SSE, DLP, Enterprise DLP, Risk Adaptive DLP, Insider Threat, SD-WAN. They do the whole shebang.
Nice.
So, yeah, this is one of those. It's probably throwing off decent, consistent cash. TPG's buying it low at a decent price with the expectation they're going to run it up at a somewhere between 5 and 15% annual growth rate and continue to milk the cash cow for quite a while, make it more efficient.
TPG is going to talk to SDG, and they'll combine it with the remnants of RSA or something. I don't know.
And it'll result, you know what it'll result in? It'll result in an ITGAF.
Yeah, 3-letter acronym. PE companies will get together and just smush legacy security vendors together.
Yeah, because that works every time.
Every 70% of the time, all the time. What is the quote?
Exactly.
From Anchorman. All right. SCADAfence got picked up by Honeywell. It's an OT vendor. I don't know a whole lot about the OT space, but I imagine it could be kind of a similar thing. OT isn't. When was the last time we saw an OT company get funding? Like, I feel like that. The industry's done funding that kind of stuff because there was a whole bunch of them. There were like 30 OT security companies, and some of them, I think a few of them just shut down. So I imagine this could have been a similar thing where their last round was a while ago.
Yeah, I don't know enough about the OT space to really make commentary on it either. It's about as popular as mobile security these days.
Oh no, it's more popular than mobile security. No, they raised it's just called a venture round after their Series B in March of 2023, $16 million. So they should have had some money. But maybe this is a decent pickup. There's not a whole lot of. I don't think there's information on any of these acquisitions on the actual deal details.
Not any price. Of them. They're not. That's a new thing, right? Because nobody wants to admit what the valuations are anymore, at least not publicly.
Well, it would hurt both sides, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So number 21's interesting from an international relations vantage point. Bitdefender, which I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think is Bucharest, Romania based, acquired.
I know the founder is. I don't know if the company's based out of there.
I totally could be wrong about that, but either way, they're acquiring.
No, you're right. Romania.
Harangi Cyber, which is based out of Shanghai?
Singapore.
Singapore. I knew it was an S. Sorry, I read the article and then forgot which S it was. Singapore-based company, Harangi. So that's kind of interesting, too, that we're starting to see some bigger companies get acquired out of nations where we haven't seen those acquisitions rolling in before. Now, this one just happens to be rolling into a Romanian company, right? But Bitdefender's a big brand. They're a nationally, globally recognized brand.
Yeah.
And so for them to pick up a Singapore-based company is an interesting pattern we should keep our eyes on as we move into next year. Are some of the bigger brands going to go shopping overseas as well?
Yeah, and we've started seeing more and more startups out of France, out of
South America.
Certainly a ton out of Israel, of course. I think that's easily second biggest next to the U.S., but yeah, all over Europe as well. So yeah, it makes sense we'd start seeing some of those get picked up. And yeah, Singapore is pretty healthy cybersecurity ecosystem down there as well. A lot of funding for it.
Absolutely.
Let's see. So it was 21. None of these others that I really wanted to touch on. Again, I know CyberGRX. I don't know Process Unity, so I can't really speak to that very well. Apparently, they're both TPRM related. So CyberGRX, their goal is to help you speed up answering vendor questionnaires. To speed up that process. The idea that maybe you can just answer one questionnaire and then use that over and over multiple times. Of course, in practice, there's issues with that. Like, what if one company I'm doing business with uses CyberGRX and another that I'm doing business with uses another one? I still end up filling out the same questionnaire multiple times anyway. Because those CyberX isn't sharing the questionnaire results with their competitors. So, let's move on to, second time we've seen a massive valuation correction, number 26 here. Sneak sees valuation plummet by over 50%. Not nearly as bad as what we saw with Cybereason. I think was more drastic. Was what, like, I forget what the percentage was, but it was like order of magnitude. Yeah, it was like 2.3 billion to like 250 million or something like that. Yeah,
it was 90+%. Yeah, it's interesting, the funding history when we talk about Sneak. And I don't have it all in front of me. What I'm looking at actually is a LinkedIn post by Pramod Gosavi, who's a VC, and he just cracks me up with his wit. He's a very, very funny VC. If you get a chance to follow him on LinkedIn, I highly recommend it. But he has the amount of funding and kind of the valuations from 2020, January 2020, they did 150 million Series C, where they became a unicorn. 9 months later, a 200 million Series D at 2.6 billion. 6 months later, now we're in March of 2021, a 300 million Series E at 4.7 billion. 6 months later, September 21. So this is all of what? 16 months, 17 months.
Peak insanity, September 21, 2020.
Yep. 530 million Series F at 8.5 billion, led by Sands Capital. So
that was peak Tiger Global right there is what that was.
Well, Tiger Global did the E round. Sands Capital did the F round. What's interesting about this article, though, and I highly recommend you dig into this article, is the methodology of repricing and how the market has to figure out how to reprice these. What's happening is these folks are now selling in the secondary market chunks of equity, which is now essentially marking a new price for this equity, right? So in the latest deal, there's $6 million worth of shares that somebody's selling at $6.85 a share, which brings it down to, I forget the exact new valuation, but whatever it is, 50-60% less than the peak. And so 3.3 billion, a 4 billion drop from the peak.
3.3.
Yep. The new
valuation. Because they've raised 1.2.
Yep. So former SNCC employees and early investors are doing secondaries left and right, trying to unload the stock. And each time they do that and somebody sells $5, $6, $10 million worth of their shares, that's a new mark on market, right? And so the question is, do the investors have to now mark this down in their portfolios? How does that represent back through to their LPs? A lot of things that are going to have to come from this. And Pramod posted a really good question. Why doesn't SNCC just go get acquired, right? Like, move on from this thing. You're done. You're not going the right direction. And he made a great point. He put a case in point that a great fit for them would be Palo Alto Networks to acquire SNCC. Because most of SNCC's go-to-market is now top-down compared to bottoms-up, which is where they started. Now they've converted to a top-down methodology, and they can leverage Palo's expansive capability to sell, right? It's a perfect fit. And I countered in the conversation, and said, the real question is, do all the investors, do they have the ability to set aside that dopamine hit that they got by $8.5 billion valuation and say, hey, this thing's only worth $3 billion now. It's still a great exit. We're going to go ahead and sell it. That's going to be the literally the $1 billion question.
Yeah. It's not going to be easy to do that either.
I think somebody like Palo picks them up, or somebody like Google picks them up. He also makes a good case for Google, but Google grabbing them. I could also see Microsoft picking them up. Another good spot for them. So
I don't know.
The question is, can they get out of it?
Yeah. And it's if it's happening to Cybereason and if it's happening to Sneak, how many other? It's happening to everybody to some extent, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think we're going to see that unicorn list shrink significantly, and I think there's still that hope among a lot of companies that, oh, the market will just rebound. And I think VCs, other investors, and CEOs really have to start adjusting their expectations. I don't think we're going to see what we saw 3-5 years ago. I just don't. I could be totally wrong. Tyler's really the investment guy here, but from everything I've read, from everything I've heard from other people, we're not going to go back to that. So those crazy valuations and the hopes of either a massive acquisition or an insane IPO, I don't think we're going to see it, at least not in the next 10 years. I think it's going to take a long time, because every time I read something like Bloomberg or the Wall Street Journal, Tyler, you're laughing at me, and I'm going to let you respond in a second, but it's like, oh, we're so close to a recession. But we've been reading that for 2 years. We've been reading it for 2 years, and we still haven't hit rock bottom. So this isn't going to be a quick fix.
You know, I'm smiling, and I'm definitely not laughing at you. I'm smiling because of the history of the .com. I heard these exact same stories in 2002. It's going to take a decade or more to really respond. And yeah, it's going to take a period of time. But one thing this world is really good at is forgetting the lessons of the past. We continually do it. So give it a handful of years where it's going to be a slower growth. It'll still continue to grow. The market will do great. The economy will do fine. We're all going to make, consistent growth. And then someday, some spark, right? Something is going to light it afire again, and the stupid hubris will come back. And that's why I was laughing. Is we, as a species, we're just so good at forgetting our lessons learned. We're just not good at remembering stuff like that.
No, I totally agree with that. But I think, we've been hearing recession is coming for 2 years. So we're not there.
No.
And you have these CEOs, especially these startups, these young CEOs who are thinking, oh, piece of cake, 5 to 7 years, I'm going to, be making $40 million, whatever it is. And they're going to get bored at some point, because this isn't what they thought they were signing up for.
No, what they're signing up for now is to build a business, to build a real business that makes real money and not just funny money on top of free. But that's not
what they signed up for 5 years ago. They thought they were going to get in it, work really hard, make a bazillion bucks, and go on to their next startup.
And those ones will be filtered out. Yeah, sure. They have to be. Hey, Adrian, I don't know if we have it in our list. But can we talk briefly about the OrcaWiz lawsuit?
Yeah, that should have been in here. I don't know why it didn't make it in.
Might be. I might have just missed it in my scan, but
no, I think you're right. I think it's missing. I'll add it while you launch into that.
Yeah. So just to kind of update folks, there was a lawsuit filed by Orca claiming that Wiz violated and stole patents from Orca.
More than just patents.
I don't have the entire. I stupidly have the wrong image up here. Hold on.
So the acquisition was that they infringed upon, I believe, the patent and were basically copycatting all the technology.
Yeah, and I made a comment when I
shot back and said, well, instead of innovating, perhaps Orca should just. Or instead of filing a lawsuit, perhaps Orca should just go innovate. So it's a little bit of a pissing contest going on over there.
Oh yeah, that made me laugh out loud. The commentary about if you can't compete, you sue kind of thing, which made me chuckle. And I even posted a comment on it on LinkedIn and social media, and was basically saying the same thing. Like, really, Maybe this is an alternate way if you can't compete to go ahead and try to sue your way, but it feels very desperate from Orca. But, and this is where I'm going to put a pin in it, there's some additional stuff has come to light since the original post, some more detail, and I will post a link to Pramod. Again, Pramod Gosavi is the person that I see who has posted it first. Doesn't mean he was first, but it's the first one I've seen that actually shows the two patents side by side that were written by the same patent attorney. Major problem there. And basically the two patents are almost identical word for word, including imagery, layout, and everything in the particular diagram. Now, what I see is comparing one page to one page of probably much larger patent, okay? So I'm not making a judgment call here. I'm just looking at this one piece of data and going, well, maybe there's more to this lawsuit than just desperation of an inability to compete in market. There might be something more here.
Yeah, and they in the actual filing, the legal complaint, they show that and they list all that, but they also point out like even the marketing stuff is like copy paste. Like they use the same taglines, they use the same coffee vendor. They point out they use the same like at events. They down to how they describe the product and market it is literally like a copy paste. So it doesn't look great.
No, and I was completely flabbergasted when I actually saw it, because I'm like, oh, sure, yeah, okay, it was copied, but I'm like, well, same attorney. Did they just cut and paste? Were they stupid enough to just cut and paste? That's not a good sign if they were.
Yeah, and Orca was clearly, founded like I think a full year before. Wiz?
Well, full year before, but then the article goes on to say that the Orca folks pitched Microsoft, where the founders of Wiz were working post-acquisition from Adalom, where they were working. Adalom got acquired into Microsoft. Orca pitched Microsoft on the Orca product, and almost within a very, very short period of time, like within a matter of a couple months, Wiz not spun off, but the team quit and formed Wiz and went and executed. Now, it's probably one of those situations, one of those situations where two people came up with similar ideas and were executing in parallel. That was at least my first thought on that kind of like timeline till I saw the patent stuff. And then it's like, well, maybe not. Maybe there's more to it.
Yeah. I don't know how that works in the courts, but there's certainly a lot of evidence that shows them doing almost exactly the same thing.
And talk about a big financial.
What kind of liability does the lawyer have in this, the patent attorney?
Oh, there's two lawyers. They hired away two lawyers. One of them was a patent attorney. The other, I think, was like counsel or something like that. I forget if it was inside counsel or outside counsel. But yeah, that's something that somebody else brought up that I was talking to is there, somebody getting disbarred out of this?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is crazy. When I first saw it, I'm like, oh, this is silly. It'll go away. And the more I read about it, the more I realize, wow, this one's going to be fun to watch over the next 2 years, because it's just a big target, right? Wiz is, quote, the fastest growing cybersecurity company and potentially the fastest growing company in history. To quote themselves, they're bragging about going from 0 to 100 million ARR in 18 months. And if that's truly the case, that's a great target to sue.
Yep. Oh yeah. I'm sure we'll see more on that as the legal wheels start to roll there, and this won't be the last that we talk about it. I did get it added. It should be story number 38 once the website updates. Yeah, let's see. What else do we have here? Microsoft rebranded Azure Active Directory to Microsoft Entra ID, something no one will remember the first time.
We will continually call it Microsoft's Entra ID, formerly known as AD.
Yeah. I mean, it's Microsoft, like, maybe they have like a chief rebranding officer that needs to keep busy or something like that, but they even rebranded threat actors, came up with their own threat actor names, and now we have like Typhoon this and Storm that.
Oh, yeah. There was a whole article about the craziness of the threat actors, I think, in Wired, and about the threat actor naming, not about the actors, but about the naming and how silly they were. Yeah, the
naming convention.
Yeah, and I guess the convention is actually set to the animals represent the countries. something like that, like Red Panda or Panda was China.
Well, that's CrowdStrike. That's CrowdStrike.
Yeah, okay. System. Yeah, and then Microsoft decided that's not cool enough and had to do their own thing, but that's so silly.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, Defender's now tied to everything, where it used to just be the AV, the endpoint security agent, and now you've got, Defender for cloud apps, and, there's like 11 Defender products now. They're just making it so hard to keep up with their products.
Well, and not only that, but...
Go ahead.
Kate. Nope, you go first.
So I help with the descriptions on our adapters. And this problem with Microsoft specifically took about 2 hours of my time this week because we had to rename them and figure
Mapping
out. It was, that is 2 hours of my life I will never get back. So shame on you, Microsoft. Shame on you, because it's just not that important.
Shame on Microsoft's chief rebranding officer.
Yes, you made everybody's life really annoying.
Here's the thing that I question though. Is Microsoft stealthily and silently dominating and looking to dominate the cyber market? They now have so many product lines. Well, stealthily in the sense that they're adding new product lines, but I'm not hearing people going, hey, be careful, Microsoft is running over cyber. Like, I've not heard that storyline being presented publicly very often. I just keep hearing, like, literally, I think it was yesterday, a new announcement from Microsoft that they're launching the SASE, which I think is the stuff we're talking about. Their entrance into SASE, right? And then the rebranding of...
We say SASE. Come on, man.
I hate sassy,
he just can't say sassy.
Whatever.
He feels really silly.
They're entering yet another freaking cyber market, right? And it's like, okay, right. They got that. They got their endpoint stuff. They got GitHub. GitHub is kind of stealthily taking over some AppSec capabilities with SCA and static analysis. And when you look at the breadth of what Microsoft offers from a cyber platform vantage point, it's getting bigger and bigger every day. But nobody's calling out the fact that, hey, Microsoft's dominating the market, and they're really running it over.
I think they have been. I don't think anybody's making headlines, but Microsoft invested a boatload of money a couple of years back and said, we are going to be the biggest cybersecurity vendor. And they're just doing their job.
Yeah, there's plenty of coverage.
Plotting away.
When they hit the 10 billion mark, there was a lot of coverage about that. And more recently, I think we talked about it here. About them being close to the 20 billion mark in annual revenue on security.
So if you want to play with the best, work for the best, contribute to the best cyber company on the planet, am I hearing you should go work for Microsoft?
Not if you look at what goes on with Azure. What was the latest thing? Like they somehow lost. No, the latest breach. So they somehow. China was able to forge basically access tokens to get into key people's Outlook and OWA email accounts. And there's no details yet on how that key was lost that was used to forge these OAuth IDs, basically. So, and just it seems like every other week, there's some massive, cross-tenant vulnerability in Azure or something like that, where it's just everybody's data is exposed. They're not. It's funny because they're building this massive. They're becoming this massive security vendor, but their own security isn't giving people a whole lot of confidence.
Has it ever?
There's another way to look at it, though, right?
Fair enough, Tyler.
They never said they wanted to be the best security vendor. They said they wanted to be the biggest. I think if you asked them, they would say they are the best. But the flip side of it is, if you are the biggest, your target is like this. Yeah. If you're a small company, there is that perspective, right? They have more products, more surface area for people to go after them.
So if we believe that cybersecurity is a massively growing market, and I think we all probably would agree with that, right? We would all say, yeah, cyber in general is massively growing. It's one of the most consistent growing, tends to be one of the most resilient to downturns, et cetera, right? It's a good, safe market on the broad sense of the term, right? Then really the only two that matter from a large player vantage point at this point is Palo Alto and Microsoft. They're not so quietly, I guess, now after hearing your guys' data points, they're not so quietly trying to dominate the world, and you might end up with a Pepsi Coke type of thing when it comes to cybersecurity. Everybody's going to go to one of those two vendors for all of their offerings.
Yeah,
it could be a good article. I think that we can make a case for that being good, and we can make a case for that being bad.
CrowdStrike is pretty big as well. I'm not sure it's just those two. Yeah, interesting. Well, and there's a lot of consolidation to do this year, so there's an opportunity for somebody else to become the next Fortra, right? Like there's definitely the opportunities out there to pick up. Somebody just needs to get the funding backing, and there's all kinds of stuff to scoop up here over the next year. What else did I want to mention before we get to the squirrel stories?
Adrian, I'm still mad at you for calling me out on SASE versus SASE. I'm so upset.
Deal with it.
He's just being sassy.
He is. So regulation here. So the White House came out with a document that I think dives into some more. I haven't had a chance to look at it. Literally, like this details came out earlier today. But the cybersecurity strategy implementation plan. So I assume this goes into more details on what was in the original national cybersecurity strategy, because one of the things that it called out was we need to figure out how we're going to do this. And then also the SEC rules that we've been talking about quite a bit, that have been kind of contentious, have been delayed, so pushed out to April 2024. So I guess we'll wait and see what kind of changes happen to those before they go into effect. You have to share what kind of cybersecurity expertise you have on your board was one of them. I forget what the other one was. I think it had to do with how quickly you have to report a cybersecurity incident. All right, and squirrel stories. There's I don't know who they've got at Red Canary. Well, this is Susanna Clark-Matt puts together this fantastic article for Red Canary, why Taylor Swift fans should work in cybersecurity, and it's a treat. It's I love this kind of these kinds of. It's not an article, but blog post. This kind of humor. It's there's a lot of boring marketing out there. I'm in marketing. I try and make sure our stuff isn't boring, but I'm not sure I can get away with going quite this far. And I love that Red Canaries enabled her to write this.
My man, I'll tell you what. I was listening to some of the, I don't know, what do they call them? The Taylor fans. I don't even remember what they're called.
Swifties.
Swifties, thank you. I was listening to some Swifties on I don't know if it was a podcast or something. My daughter was watching at one point, and how much they dissect every word, and the thing is, that Taylor plays into it. She plays into it for years now, for a decade now. She's been planting little seeds, little things, little tips, little like long con kind of plays that these folks are picking up on. And I just think it's a total hacker mentality. I love it. I think this article is actually not only funny and snarky, but 100% correct. It's a very similar mentality from hunting attackers as it is to trying to find the one little nugget that Taylor Swift said in 2014 in an interview that really showed what the future direction for her music is, right? And it's that maniacal diving into something and pushing through no matter what to be able to find the prize, right? I think it's pretty cool. I think it's a great article.
Susanna gives 13 reasons here, and I'll just read the first one. You go check out the blog post to read the rest. But the first one is you like a good mystery. Swifties are investigators by nature, and threat actors almost always leave a trail of clues when they break into a system. And there's GIFs also. You got to go check it out.
Absolutely great piece. I love it.
And then the other squirrel story here, maybe I should have done this in reverse. This is maybe the less entertaining one, but kind of tickled me. that Google Calendar now allows you to specify where you're working from throughout the day. And I just cannot imagine the organization where I'm expected to tell people what coffee shop I'm at, or whether I'm in the office or at home. Like this is not a feature. I can think of a few situations where it might be convenient, but most of the situations I can think of, absolutely not. As long as my work is getting done, you don't get to know where I'm working from.
Mine just currently says in my pajamas on the couch. That's what mine says 24/7.
Yeah, in my pajamas on the couch.
Yep.
I recently read something about that. I don't remember where it was, what article it was, because, I don't want anybody knowing where I am at all times, and certainly not based on my phone or my computer or any other digital thing I might have. That tracking to me is creepy and none of your business. But a bunch of teen and 20-somethings, their perspective is, well, it's so much safer. We know where our friends are at all times. We can keep an eye on them. We know everything about them. They know everything about us. What if something happens? So
that's
they're
a very different relationship, though, from employer, though.
Of course it is. But if they have that perspective, that attitude, it will pervade all areas of their life. They don't care. It's like, hey, I am where I am. I've always had this little device with me. It shows where I am at all time. It doesn't matter. Their parents probably were tracking them. That's the first thing they did when they got their first mobile phone. I don't know how old you were when you got your first cell phone that could do that kind of tracking, but it wasn't 16 years old. I know how old you are. We didn't have that.
I think you might be selling them short. Yeah, I think they're smart enough to recognize the difference between allowing your parents to track you and your employer.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I don't think they're not smart enough. I think they just don't care because it's so part of their life, ecosystem, culture, mindset. I don't think it's a smart or not smart thing. I think it's just.
I gotta disagree. Like a lot of the folks you're talking about, like don't even have their real names or personas anywhere online. You know, like they don't even share that. I know a lot of people in that generation who are very privacy conscious.
It's going to be interesting to see how that continues to play out from a privacy perspective. But I'm actually going to press on you, Adrian, on the need for this thing. Hybrid companies, the ones who say you got to work from the office 2 days a week, 1 day a week, 3 days a week, whatever that number is.
Yeah.
It actually does help quite a bit because you can set recurring, like every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I'm working from the office. Tuesdays and Thursdays, I set it from working from home. And that way, when people make meeting requests with me, they know whether to grab a real conference room, my office, put a Zoom in it, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it'll have some value from that. I don't think it'll have any value with regards to like literally the GPS location of what coffee shop I'm at, but I think the macro.
But you can also put on your calendar in office, remote.
Yeah, this is just making it so you don't have to put a banner on top of each day, right? It's actually just embedded into the days. And then it's smart enough, actually, the feature's smart enough, because I've had it since it was in labs, actually. I've had it for a while. The feature's smart enough to know when you book an appointment, it can now say, it'll automatically add like a Google chat to it if you're remote versus home and things like that. So you can leverage it in a better way.
Yeah, it makes sense. And that's probably how it's intended to be used. But I guarantee you it will get abused.
Oh, for sure. Everything goes straight to, the internet troll world will come out no matter what it is.
All right. I think that's all we've got for today. Thank you so much, Katie and Tyler, for joining us. Katie for the whole day. Tyler for just lazily walking in on the last segment.
Right. 1 hour. The 1 hour of power. Again, that's about all
I love you both. Thanks for joining me today, and a big thanks to everyone for watching or listening to this week's episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. We will be back next week.